Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Paper Trail. Clint Stout had built his life on precision. 20 years in the military, decorated Marine Corps colonel, had taught him that details mattered. The difference between life and death often came down to noticing what others missed. Now, at 42, that same attention to detail had made him successful in private security consulting, protecting executives and government officials who couldn't afford mistakes. But nothing had prepared him for the sight of his 4-year-old daughter, Emma, crying alone in their pristine living room, clutching a crumpled piece of paper like it might disappear if she let go. "What's wrong, princess?" Clint asked, his voice automatically softening as he lifted Emma into his arms. Her small body trembled against his chest, tear-streaked cheeks pressed against his tactical shirt that still smelled of gunpowder from the shooting range. "Mommy said we don't need you anymore because there's another baby coming," Emma whispered through broken sobs. "She said I have to go away too." The words hit Clint like shrapnel. He gently pried the paper from Emma's tiny fists, his trained eyes immediately scanning the official letterhead, Parental Rights Relinquishment Form. His name was typed clearly in the section marked Terminating Parent, with Sherry's signature already dried in blue ink at the bottom. Clint's jaw tightened as he read further. The form indicated voluntary surrender of parental rights for Emma Rose Stout to facilitate new family arrangements. His wife's handwriting filled the margins with notes about simplified adoption procedures and clean transitions. "Where's Mommy now?" Clint asked, keeping his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. "She left with Uncle Javier to go shopping for baby things," Emma sniffled. "She said not to tell you, but I don't want to go away, Daddy." Uncle Javier. Javier Barker, Sherry's old friend from college who'd been coming around more frequently over the past 6 months. Clint had noticed, but hadn't thought much of it. Sherry had always been social, and Javier worked in real estate, often helping families relocate. Clint carried Emma to the kitchen, his mind already shifting into tactical mode. He called Sherry's phone, straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. "Emma, I need you to go play in your room while Daddy makes some phone calls, okay? And don't worry, you're not going anywhere. Daddy promises." As Emma reluctantly headed upstairs, Clint pulled out his secure phone, the one he used for work that couldn't be easily traced or monitored. His first call was to his longtime friend and tech specialist, Austin Snyder. "Austin, I need a favor. Full digital workup on Sherry Kirkpatrick. Maiden name and Javier Barker. Phone records, financial transactions, social media, everything. And I need it tonight." "Jesus, Clint, what's going on?" "Just do it. Bill it to my personal account." His second call was to Vernon Benjamin, a private investigator who specialized in infidelity cases and had former NSA connections. "Vernon, emergency job. I need surveillance on 2 targets starting immediately." Clint provided the details, including Sherry's car description and Javier's address. By the time Emma was asleep 3 hours later, Clint had established a command center in his home office. The relinquishment form was spread across his desk alongside printed bank statements he'd pulled from their joint accounts. What he found made his blood run cold. Over the past 4 months, Sherry had been systematically draining their savings. Small amounts at first, $500 here, $800 there, but escalating to larger withdrawals. In total, nearly $47,000 was gone. The timing coincided perfectly with increased activity on her credit cards at high-end restaurants, hotels, and baby stores. But the most damning evidence was a hotel receipt he found in her purse. 3 nights at the Marriott downtown, charged to her personal credit card, dated last week when she claimed to be visiting her sick aunt in Phoenix. Clint studied the timeline, cross-referencing dates with his own travel schedule. Every hotel charge, every expensive dinner, every suspicious withdrawal aligned with his business trips. Sherry and Javier had been playing house for months, using his money to fund their affair while planning to eliminate him and Emma from the picture. His phone buzzed with a text from Vernon. "Targets located. Extended stay hotel on Riverside. Unit 237. They're not alone. Third party present. Appears to be preparing for long-term residency." Clint's hands clenched into fists. Not only were they planning to steal his daughter and his money, but they'd already moved into their love nest. The third party was likely Javier's legal contact, probably drawing up more paperwork to expedite the adoption process. As he sat in the dark, studying the evidence, Clint made a decision that would change everything. He'd spent his entire career protecting others, following rules, working within systems. But this wasn't about justice. This was about war. And in war, there were no rules except victory. He opened his laptop and began researching Javier Barker's background. What he found was interesting. A real estate agent with a questionable reputation, recently divorced, with a history of relationship hopping and financial instability. More importantly, Javier had gambling debts with some very unfriendly people. Clint smiled for the first time that day. He was going to give Javier and Sherry exactly what they deserved, but they'd never see it coming. Chapter 2. The Hunter's Moon. The next morning, Clint dropped Emma off at his mother-in-law's house under the pretense of a sudden business emergency. Lucy Hanson had never liked him much, but she adored Emma, and Clint knew his daughter would be safe there while he began his campaign. Sherry still wasn't answering her phone, but Clint had other ways of gathering intelligence. He drove to her sister's house first. Arlene Kelly, a nurse who lived across town and had always been the more sensible of the Kirkpatrick sisters. "Clint, what are you doing here?" Arlene opened the door, clearly surprised. She was still in her scrubs from the night shift. "I'm looking for Sherry. She didn't come home last night, and I'm worried." Arlene's expression shifted, guilt flickering across her tired features. "She didn't. Maybe she stayed at a friend's?" "Arlene, I know about Javier." The silence stretched between them before Arlene sighed and stepped aside to let him in. "How much do you know?" "Enough." "How long has this been going on?" 6 months, maybe longer." Arlene poured herself coffee with shaking hands. "She swore she was going to tell you after Emma's birthday party next month. She said you two had grown apart, that you were never home anyway. And the baby?" Arlene's cup nearly slipped from her grasp. "You know about that too? Is it mine or his?" "Sherry says it's Javier's. They've been planning to start fresh. She said you'd understand eventually, that Emma would be better off with a stable family unit." Clint absorbed this information without visible reaction, but inside, the last vestige of mercy died. Sherry hadn't just cheated. She'd been planning to erase him entirely, rewriting history to make herself the victim of an absent husband. "Where are they, Arlene?" "I can't tell you that, Clint. I know you're angry, but—" "I'm not angry," Clint said quietly, and something in his tone made Arlene step back. "I'm curious. See, I found something interesting when I ran a background check on your sister's boyfriend." He pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph Austin had found in police records. Javier Barker being arrested 2 years ago for domestic battery against his ex-wife. "Did she tell you about this?" "About how he put Rebecca Stanley in the hospital with 3 broken ribs and a fractured orbital bone." Arlene's face went white. That can't be right. Javier would never." "There's more." Clint swiped to the next image. A restraining order filed by another ex-girlfriend, Ashley Knapp, citing stalking and harassment. And this one, where he followed a woman for 6 months after she broke up with him, sending her photos of her own children walking to school. "Stop," Arlene whispered. "Your sister is carrying the child of a man who beats women and threatens children, and she wants to hand my daughter over to him." Clint leaned forward. "So, I'm going to ask you one more time. Where are they?" Arlene was crying now, hands trembling as she reached for her purse. "The Extended Stay America on Riverside Drive. Room 237. But Clint, please don't do anything crazy. Call the police, file for custody, do this the right way." "I tried the right way for 15 years, Clint replied, standing. "Look where it got me." As he drove toward the hotel, Clint's phone rang. Austin Snyder with an update. "You're not going to believe what I found in Javier's financial records," Austin said without preamble. "Guy's in a Tony Ballard for 60 grand in gambling debts. High-interest stuff. Word is Tony's getting impatient." Tony Ballard. Clint knew that name. A loan shark who operated out of the warehouse district, rumored to have connections with some very dangerous people. This was better than he'd hoped. "There's more," Austin continued. Javier's been using Sherry's credit cards to make payments, but he's still short. Way I figure it, he's planning to use your divorce settlement to clear his debts. Except there won't be a settlement. What are you planning, Clint? Justice. Clint ended the call and dialed another number. When the gravelly voice answered, he smiled grimly. Don Bullock? It's Clint Stout. I need to cash in that favor you owe me. Don Bullock ran a construction company that specialized in problem solving for clients who needed things done quickly and quietly. 3 years ago, Clint had provided security for Don's daughter's wedding when credible threats had been made against the family. Don had sworn he'd return the favor someday. Name it, Colonel. I need a building condemned. Make it look official, but make it happen fast. Which building? Extended Stay America, Riverside Drive. The whole place needs to be evacuated by tomorrow night. Consider it done. Anything else? Not yet. But Don? When I call again, things might get messy. Messier the better, as far as I'm concerned. That family still owes you. As Clint hung up, he caught sight of himself in the rearview mirror. His gray eyes had taken on the flat, predatory look that had once made enemy combatants surrender without firing a shot. Sherry and Javier thought they were playing chess with a weakened warrior. They were about to learn they'd declared war on a man who'd perfected the art of destroying enemies without leaving fingerprints. Chapter 3. The Noose Tightens. By evening, Clint had positioned himself in the parking lot across from the Extended Stay America, watching through military-grade binoculars as his wife and her lover moved around room 237 like they owned the world. Through the thin curtains, he could see them unpacking boxes, hanging pictures, playing house with his money and his future. Vernon Benjamin's surveillance report had been thorough. They'd been living there for 3 weeks, telling the front desk they were relocating for work. Javier had registered under a false name, paying cash for extended stays while using Sherry's credit cards for everything else. The third person Vernon had mentioned turned out to be Beth Mooney, a family lawyer specializing in complex custody arrangements. From her business cards scattered on the hotel room table, she was clearly helping them navigate the legal maze of stripping Clint of his parental rights while maximizing Sherry's financial gain in the divorce. Clint's phone buzzed with a text from Don Bullock. Health inspector finds serious code violations tomorrow at 2 p.m. Building evacuation by 6 p.m. Your friends will need new accommodations. Perfect timing. While Sherry and Javier scrambled to find new housing, Clint would be implementing the next phase of his plan. His phone rang. Sherry's number. Clint? Thank God you answered. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. Where's my daughter, Sherry? She's safe. She's with my mother. But we need to talk. I know you found the papers, and I can explain everything. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Meet me at Romano's restaurant tomorrow at 7. The place where we had our first date. We can work this out like civilized adults. Clint almost laughed. She was still trying to manipulate him, appealing to sentiment and nostalgia. Will Javier be joining us? A pause. This is between you and me, Clint. Please. I owe you that much. You owe me a lot more than that. But fine. Romano's at 7. After hanging up, Clint spent the next several hours in his workshop, preparing tools he hoped he wouldn't need, but knew he probably would. His military training had taught him that the best plans had multiple contingencies, and the deadliest enemies were often the ones who underestimated their opponents. At midnight, he made another call. Tony Ballard's office. The voice was professionally neutral, but carried undertones of barely controlled violence. I need to speak with Mr. Ballard about Javier Barker's account. Who's calling? Someone with information about Mr. Barker's ability to pay his debts. 5 minutes later, Tony Ballard himself came on the line. You got my attention. Talk. Javier Barker is about to come into a significant amount of money through a divorce settlement. But there are complications that might affect his ability to pay you. What kind of complications? The kind where the husband fights back, legally and otherwise. A long pause. You the husband? I am. And you're calling me because? Because I want to make sure Javier pays his debts in full before he disappears with money that doesn't belong to him. Interesting. You got a proposal. I might. Are you available to meet tomorrow night? After I settle some business with my wife. I'll send you an address. Come alone and bring proof of whatever you're claiming about Barker's finances. After securing the meeting with Tony Ballard, Clint turned his attention to the legal battlefield. He'd spent the morning consulting with his own attorney, Glenn Buchanan, a ruthless divorce lawyer who specialized in protecting high-net-worth individuals from predatory spouses. The relinquishment form is worthless without your signature, Glenn assured him. But the financial evidence you've gathered shows clear intent to defraud. We can not only block the adoption, but pursue criminal charges for theft and fraud. I don't want criminal charges yet, Clint said. I want to control the timing. What exactly are you planning, Clint? I'm going to give them exactly what they think they want, and then I'm going to take it all away. The next afternoon, Clint watched from his surveillance position as health inspectors swarmed the extended stay America. By 4 p.m., official notices were posted on every door. Immediate evacuation due to structural integrity concerns and potential asbestos contamination. He smiled as he watched Sherry and Javier frantically packing their belongings, Beth Mooney helping them carry boxes to Javier's pickup truck. They had no idea this was just the opening move. At 6:30 p.m., Clint arrived at Romano's wearing his best suit and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sherry was already there, seated in a corner booth wearing a blue dress he'd bought her for their anniversary last year. She looked nervous but determined, her hands protectively covering her still flat stomach. "You came," she said as he sat down. "I said I would. Clint, I know how this looks, but you have to understand, we weren't happy. We haven't been happy for years. You're never home, and when you are, it's like you're still deployed somewhere else. So you decided to steal my daughter and my money. It's not stealing, it's restructuring. Emma needs stability, and I can give her that with Javier. He loves children. He wants to be a real father to her." Clint leaned back, studying his wife's face. "Tell me about Javier's first wife." Sherry's expression faltered. "What about her?" "Rebecca Stanley. The one he put in the hospital. That was a misunderstanding. She was abusive too." Javier was defending himself. "And Ashley Knapp? Was she abusive when he stalked her for 6 months?" Sherry's hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. "You don't understand Javier like I do. He's changed. People can change." "You're right," Clint said quietly. "People can change. I used to believe in forgiveness, in second chances, in working things out. But sitting here, watching you lie to my face while carrying another man's child and planning to steal my daughter, I've changed too." "Clint, please. You want to know what I discovered today, Sherry? Javier owes $60,000 to Tony Ballard." "Know who Tony Ballard is?" The color drained from Sherry's face. "He's the kind of man who breaks kneecaps when people don't pay their debts. And your boyfriend has been using your credit cards, my money, to make payments. But he's still short, which means you and Emma were never his endgame. You were his exit strategy." Sherry was crying now, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "You're lying. Javier loves me. Maybe he does, but love doesn't pay gambling debts." Clint stood up. "You have 24 hours to bring Emma home and tear up those relinquishment papers. If you don't, I'm going to stop playing defense and start playing offense." "And Sherry? You've never seen me play offense." As he walked toward the door, Sherry called after him. "What does that mean?" "Clint, what are you going to do?" He turned back one last time, as she flinched at the expression on his face. "I'm going to remind you why Marines don't lose wars." Chapter 4. The Art of War. The abandoned warehouse on the east side of town looked like every cliché from crime movies, but Tony Ballard's operation was anything but amateur. Clint arrived precisely at 10 p.m., carrying a briefcase filled with financial documents that would either start a partnership or get him killed. 2 men patted him down professionally before escorting him to an office that managed to be both Spartan and intimidating. Tony Ballard himself was smaller than Clint had expected, maybe 5'8" with graying hair and soft hands. But his eyes held the kind of intelligence that had built criminal empires without ever getting caught. "Colonel Stout," Tony said, gesturing to a chair. "I did some checking after your call. Impressive military record. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, commendations for operations I'm not supposed to know about. What's a war hero doing in my office? Learning that wars don't end when you come home." Tony laughed. "Fair enough. Show me what you brought." Clint opened the briefcase, spreading out bank statements, credit card records, and hotel receipts. Javier Barker has been systematically draining my account for 6 months. Total theft of approximately $47,000, plus interest on your loan brings his debt to roughly $107,000. Your math's good. Continue. My wife thinks she's getting half my assets in the divorce, about $1.2 million. Javier thinks he's getting a fresh start and a clean slate. They're both wrong. Because I'm going to destroy them first. Professionally, financially, and personally. But I need Javier alive long enough to suffer. Tony leaned back in his chair. You want me to postpone collection? I want you to accelerate it. But surgically. Apply pressure at exactly the right moments to maximize psychological damage. And what do I get out of this arrangement? Clint pulled out another document. The deed to a commercial property downtown that he'd inherited from his father. This building is worth $300,000. Consider it payment for services rendered. Tony examined the deed carefully. You're serious about this? Dead serious. What kind of services are we talking about? Surveillance. Intimidation. Maybe some property damage if things escalate. Nothing that can be traced back to you or me. And if Barker can't pay even after you destroy him, then you collect whatever assets remain. But Tony, I guarantee you'll get paid. They shook hands, and Clint felt another piece of his old life fall away. He'd just allied himself with a criminal to destroy his wife and her lover. 6 months ago, the thought would have horrified him. Now, it felt like tactical necessity. The next morning, Clint implemented phase 2 of his plan. He called his bank and reported the theft of Sherry's credit cards, providing evidence of unauthorized charges. By noon, her cards were frozen and flagged for fraud investigation. Then he called their joint credit card companies and requested immediate closure of all accounts due to suspicious activity and identity theft concerns. The customer service representatives were sympathetic to a concerned husband trying to protect his family's finances. His final call was to their mortgage company. As the primary borrower, he had the right to request a comprehensive financial audit of all account holders. He provided evidence of Sherry's suspicious spending patterns and suggested she might be a victim of financial elder abuse or coercion. By 3 p.m., Sherry's phone was buzzing with calls from confused customer service representatives, fraud investigators, and automated systems alerting her to account suspensions. Clint was in his home office when she finally called him, her voice sharp with panic. What did you do? All my cards are frozen, and the bank is saying there's a fraud investigation. I protected our assets from further theft. This is insane. I need those cards. I have expenses, doctor's appointments. You should have thought of that before you decided to steal from me. Clint, please. I'm pregnant. I need prenatal care. Then come home. Bring Emma. Tear up the relinquishment papers, and we'll discuss your medical needs. I can't. Javier needs me. We're building something together. Where are you staying since the hotel kicked you out? A long pause. That's none of your business. Actually, it is. I own half of everything you purchase, including whatever flop house you're hiding in. And Sherry? I know about Javier's gambling debts. Do you really think Tony Ballard is going to wait much longer for his money? You don't know what you're talking about. Ask Javier about Rebecca Stanley's medical bills. Ask him about the restraining orders. Ask him why he's really interested in a pregnant woman with access to divorce settlement money. The line went dead. Clint smiled grimly and turned his attention to the next phase, isolating Sherry from her support network. He started with her job. Sherry worked as a marketing coordinator for a family-owned advertising agency run by the Thomas family. Chris Thomas, the owner, was a devout Catholic who valued family stability and had always spoken proudly of his married employees. Clint made an appointment under the pretense of possibly hiring the agency for his security consulting business. Clint, good to see you, Chris said warmly as they sat in his office. How's Sherry? We've been worried about her lately. She's been calling in sick a lot, and when she is here, she seems distracted. That's actually what I wanted to discuss, Clint said. Sherry's been having some personal issues that might affect her work performance. Is everything okay at home? She's been involved with another man. They're living together now, and she's pregnant with a child. I'm filing for divorce. Chris's expression shifted from concern to shock. I had no idea. Clint, I'm so sorry. The thing is, this man she's involved with, Javier Barker, has some serious problems. Gambling debts, history of domestic violence, connections to some dangerous people. I'm worried about Sherry's safety, but I'm also worried about the liability this might create for your company. What kind of liability? Clint pulled out copies of Javier's arrest records. If something happens to Sherry at work, or if her personal problems start affecting client relationships, it could reflect poorly on the agency. Chris studied the documents with growing alarm. This man beat his ex-wife, hospitalized her, and there's more. Clint showed him the restraining order. I'm not trying to get Sherry fired, Chris. I'm trying to protect everyone involved. Maybe she needs some time off to figure out her situation. I appreciate you bringing this to my attention, Chris said slowly. I'll have to discuss this with HR, but yes, I think a leave of absence might be best for everyone. By 5 p.m., Sherry had received a call requesting she take indefinite unpaid leave pending resolution of her personal circumstances. Clint's phone rang almost immediately. You bastard. You got me fired. I protected your employer from liability. They made their own decision. How am I supposed to support myself? Support Emma? Come home, Sherry. This all stops when you come home. Never. Then you'd better hope Javier has a solution. Because tomorrow, things get worse. As he hung up, Clint felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. He was systematically dismantling the life Sherry and Javier had tried to build on the ruins of his family. And this was just the beginning. His phone buzzed with a text from Tony Ballard. Barker missed today's payment. Applied first-level pressure. He's looking for you. Clint smiled. Let Javier come looking. The hunter was about to become the hunted. Chapter 5. Pressure Points. Javier Barker found Clint at the gun range the next evening, his face flushed with anger and desperation. Clint had been expecting this confrontation. In fact, he'd made sure to be in a public place with security cameras when it happened. You son of a bitch. Javier stormed across the range, ignoring the shocked looks from other shooters. You think you could destroy people's lives because you can't handle being divorced? Clint calmly finished loading his .45, then turned to face Javier. Even in civilian clothes, his military bearing was unmistakable, shoulders squared, weight balanced, hands relaxed but ready. Javier was bigger, maybe 20 pounds heavier, but he carried himself like a man who'd never been in a real fight. Mr. Barker, Clint said calmly, I was wondering when we'd meet face to face. Cut the bullshit. I know you're behind Sherry's cards getting frozen, her losing her job, all of it. I protected my assets from theft and warned her employer about potential liability issues. Everything I did was legal. You ruined her life out of spite. I corrected some financial irregularities. Clint set down his weapon and faced Javier fully. Tell me, how much of my money have you spent on gambling? Javier's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. $47,000 from our joint accounts, plus whatever you charged to her credit cards. Tony Ballard appreciates customers who pay their debts promptly. You talked to Tony? Fear crept into Javier's voice. We're practically business partners now. He's very interested in your payment schedule. Javier lunged forward, grabbing Clint's shirt. You bastard. You don't know what you're messing with. The confrontation lasted exactly 3 seconds. Clint stepped back, broke Javier's grip with a simple arm technique, and applied pressure to a nerve cluster in Javier's shoulder that dropped him to his knees. Don't, Clint said quietly, loud enough for the security cameras to pick up. Touch me. Again. He released the pressure, and Javier stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder. Here's what's going to happen. Clint continued conversationally. You're going to stay away from my daughter. You're going to convince Sherry to come home. And you're going to find a way to pay your debts without using money you stole from me. And if I don't, Clint smiled, and Javier involuntarily stepped back. Then I stopped being reasonable. After Javier left, Clint made a call to Vernon Benjamin. I need 24/7 surveillance on both targets. Something's about to break, and I want documentation of everything. Already on it, Colonel. Interesting development. They moved into a cheap motel on Highway 9 after her cards got frozen. Barker's been making desperate phone calls all day, trying to arrange loans. Any luck? Not so far. Word's gotten around about his situation. Nobody wants to loan money to a man with Tony Ballard breathing down his neck. That evening, Clint received an unexpected visitor. Lucy Hanson, Sherry's mother, stood on his doorstep holding Emma's hand. The 4-year-old broke free and ran into his arms. "Daddy, I missed you. I missed you too, princess." Clint held his daughter tight, inhaling the scent of her shampoo and feeling some of the cold fury in his chest warm slightly. Lucy Hanson looked older than her 62 years, stress lines etched deep around her eyes. "We need to talk, Clint." After putting Emma to bed, they sat in the living room where this nightmare had started 3 days ago. "Sherry came to see Emma today," Lucy began. "She was different, desperate. She begged me to sign some papers giving her temporary custody." "Did you?" "Of course not." "But Clint," she's scared. Really scared. She said people are threatening her, that you've turned everyone against her. "I haven't turned anyone against her. I've simply made sure people know who they're dealing with." "What does that mean?" Clint handed her the folder of documents he compiled on Javier. Arrest records, restraining orders, financial records showing the gambling debts. Lucy read through them slowly, her face growing paler with each page. "Oh my God. Sherry doesn't know about this, does she?" "She knows. I told her." She chose not to believe it. "She's pregnant, Clint. Whatever she's done, that baby didn't ask for this. That baby isn't my problem." "How can you say that? You loved Sherry once." "I loved the woman I thought she was. The woman who disappeared when she decided to steal my daughter and build a life with a man who beats women." Lucy was crying now. "There has to be another way. Some compromise." I offered her a compromise. "Come home, give up the affair, tear up the relinquishment papers." She refused. "What are you going to do?" Clint met her eyes, and she flinched at what she saw there. "I'm going to win." Later that night, after Lucy left with promises to keep Emma safe, Clint received a call from Tony Ballard. "Your boy Barker just tried to rob a convenience store," Tony reported. "Got away with maybe $300 before the cops showed up. He's sitting in county lockup right now. Bail set at $5,000. Cash only. Perfect. Make sure nobody posts it for him. Already handled. Had a word with the bail bondsman in town. Barker's credit isn't good enough for their services." Clint hung up and immediately called Sherry. "Javier's in jail," he said without preamble. "What? That's impossible. He went to meet with a potential client. He robbed a convenience store for $300 because he's desperate to pay his gambling debts." "You're lying. Call the county jail. Booking number 47291. Armed robbery, resisting arrest." The line went quiet except for Sherry's ragged breathing. "Sherry, this is what your new life looks like. Your boyfriend is a criminal who will steal, fight, and hurt people when he's desperate. And he's going to get more desperate. I can bail him out." "With what money?" "I froze your cards, remember? And I know your checking account has maybe $400 in it." "My mother." "Your mother knows about Javier's history now. She's not giving you money to bail out a domestic abuser." "Clint, please. I'll do anything. Just help him." "Anything?" "Yes. Come home tonight. Bring the relinquishment papers and tear them up in front of me. Give me full custody of Emma, and I'll post Javier's bail." I can't do that." "Then I guess you've made your choice." As he hung up, Clint felt another piece of his former self crumble away. He'd just used his wife's desperation against her, manipulated her emotions to serve his own ends. 3 days ago, the thought would have disgusted him. Now it felt like winning. Chapter 6. The Point of No Return. The next morning brought unexpected complications. Glenn Buchanan called with news that made Clint's blood run cold. "Sherry's filed an emergency restraining order against you," Glenn reported. "Claims you threatened her and Javier with physical violence. She's also petitioned for emergency custody of Emma, citing concerns about your mental state." "Based on what evidence?" "Security footage from the gun range showing your altercation with Barker. She's claiming you assaulted him and made threats." Clint closed his eyes, recognizing his tactical error. "When's the hearing?" "This afternoon at 2 p.m. Judge Hamilton is presiding." Judge Hamilton. Clint knew him by reputation. A family court judge with traditional values who favored mothers in custody disputes and took domestic violence allegations seriously. "Glenn, I need you to do something." File our own emergency motion for full custody. Include everything we have on Javier's criminal history and Sherry's financial theft. That's playing nuclear, Clint. Once we cross that line. The line was crossed when she tried to steal my daughter. File it. An hour later, Clint was sitting in his lawyer's office reviewing their strategy when Austin Snyder called with intel that changed everything. You need to hear this, Austin said. I've been monitoring Sherry's phone calls from jail visits. She and Javier are planning to run. What? Soon as she gets him out, they're leaving town. Talked about heading to Mexico, maybe Central America. She mentioned having access to money you don't know about. Clint felt ice form in his veins. What money? Life insurance policy on you. Apparently, she's been paying premiums on $1 million policy for the past year. Made some comment about how it would be easier if you had an accident before the divorce was finalized. The room spun slightly. His wife wasn't just planning to steal his daughter and money. She was planning to kill him. Austin, I need you to hack into Sherry's email accounts. All of them. Find me evidence of this life insurance policy and any communication about harming me. Clint, that's illegal. So, is conspiracy to commit murder. Do it. While Austin worked on digital evidence, Clint made another call to Tony Ballard. Change of plans, he said when Tony answered. I need Javier out of jail today. Thought you wanted him locked up. I need him where I can watch him. How quickly can you arrange bail? Give me an hour. By noon, Clint had positioned himself across from the county jail with a clear view of the exit. Vernon Benjamin was in a second vehicle, ready to begin tracking. When Javier walked out at 12:47 p.m., he immediately called someone on his cell phone. The conversation was brief and urgent. Then Javier climbed into a waiting taxi. Stay with him, Clint radioed to Vernon. I'm going to the courthouse. The emergency custody hearing was a war zone. Sherry's lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman named Claudia Casey, painted Clint as an unstable veteran with violent tendencies who'd used his military training to intimidate and threaten her client. Your Honor, Claudia argued, Colonel Stout has systematically destroyed my client's financial stability, gotten her fired from her job, and used his connections with known criminals to harass her boyfriend. The security footage clearly shows him assaulting Mr. Barker at a gun range. Glenn Buchanan fired back with their evidence of Sherry's theft, Javier's criminal history, and the attempted relinquishment of parental rights. Your Honor, Mrs. Stout has stolen nearly $50,000 from joint accounts, attempted to illegally surrender custody of their child, and is romantically involved with a man who has a documented history of domestic violence and gambling addiction. Judge Hamilton reviewed the evidence with growing concern. This is one of the most disturbing cases I've seen in 20 years on the bench. Both parties seem to have engaged in questionable behavior. Your Honor, Glenn continued, we have additional evidence that Mrs. Stout and Mr. Barker are planning to flee the jurisdiction with the child. That's ridiculous, Claudia protested. Glenn handed the judge a document Austin had found in Sherry's email. Confirmation of a large life insurance policy on Clint with Sherry as the sole beneficiary. This policy was purchased secretly 1 year ago, Glenn explained. Combined with the financial theft and attempted custody manipulation, it suggests a pattern of premeditated fraud. Judge Hamilton studied the document carefully. Mrs. Stout, did you purchase a life insurance policy on your husband without his knowledge? Sherry looked trapped. It was a financial planning decision, protecting our family's future, while simultaneously draining joint accounts and planning to relocate with another man's child. It's not what it looks like. Here's what I'm ordering, Judge Hamilton said grimly. Temporary custody of Emma Stout is awarded to Colonel Stout. Mrs. Stout is granted supervised visitation only, and neither she nor Mr. Barker are permitted to remove the child from this jurisdiction. Both parties are enjoined from further financial manipulation of joint assets. Clint felt a surge of victory, but it was short-lived. As they left the courthouse, Claudia Casey pulled Glenn aside. Tell your client this isn't over, she said quietly. We're going to appeal, and we're going to investigate every move he's made in the past week. If he's done anything illegal, and I suspect he has, we'll expose it. Glenn relayed the threat as they walked to their cars. How much trouble are we in? Clint asked. Depends on what you've actually done. Clint, I need to ask, Have you broken any laws in your campaign against Sherry and Javier? Clint thought about his partnership with Tony Ballard, the building condemnation he'd arranged, the financial manipulation, the illegal surveillance. Define broken. That's what I was afraid of. As Clint drove home to collect Emma from his mother-in-law's house, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You think you won today? Wait until tonight. Some games have deadly consequences. Clint stared at the message, recognizing it for what it was, a declaration of war. He'd spent 3 days systematically destroying his wife's life, believing he was fighting for justice. Now he realized he'd been fighting for survival all along. The real battle was just beginning. Chapter 7: Blood and Betrayal. The attack came at 11:47 p.m., precisely when Clint's security system showed its only blind spot. 3 men in black tactical gear approached his house through the neighbor's backyard, moving with military precision that told him these weren't street thugs. They were professionals. Clint had been expecting this since receiving the threatening text. He'd sent Emma to stay with his sister in another state, activated his home's defensive systems, and prepared for siege warfare. The first man through the patio door triggered a motion sensor that activated floodlights and began recording to cloud storage. The second man disabled the main alarm panel, but not before Clint received the alert on his secure phone. He was waiting in the living room, dressed in full tactical gear with night vision goggles, when they entered through the front door. Clint Stout. The lead man's voice was professionally calm. We need to talk. I'm listening. Our employer wants to discuss a business proposition. You've been making life difficult for some people, and that's affecting other business interests. Let me guess. Tony Ballard decided I was more trouble than Javier's debt was worth. Mr. Ballard appreciates your cooperation in the matter of Mr. Barker's obligations. However, your wife has made him a more attractive offer. Clint felt pieces clicking together. The life insurance policy. $1 million, minus Mr. Ballard's fee for services rendered. Mrs. Stout gets to start fresh with her boyfriend, and everyone's debts are paid. Except I'd be dead. Regrettably, yes. Home invasion gone wrong. Very tragic. Clint had faced death before, but never at the hands of hired killers sent by his own wife. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound could. Counteroffer, he said quietly. We're listening. You kill Sherry and Javier instead. I'll pay you double whatever she offered. The lead man tilted his head, considering. You'd pay $2 million to kill your wife. I'd pay it to eliminate a threat to my daughter's safety. Interesting, but we've already accepted Mrs. Stout's contract. Then you've made a tactical error. Clint triggered the remote detonator he'd been holding, and the room exploded in light and sound as military-grade flashbangs erupted from hidden positions throughout the house. He'd bought the devices from Don Bullock, along with other equipment that technically wasn't available to civilians. The 3 killers were temporarily blinded and disoriented, but their training kicked in quickly. They spread out, seeking cover while their vision cleared. Clint was already moving, using routes he'd planned and practiced. The house was his terrain, and he knew every sight line, every angle, every advantage. The first man died quietly in the kitchen, a knife between his ribs before he knew Clint was behind him. The second lasted longer, getting off 3 shots that shattered expensive pottery but missed their target. The third man was the most dangerous, a professional who adapted quickly to changing circumstances. They fought hand-to-hand in the living room, destroying furniture and leaving blood on the walls. When it was over, Clint stood amid the wreckage of his home, 3 bodies at his feet and the taste of copper in his mouth. He'd killed men before, but never in his own living room, never because his wife had hired them to murder him. He was still standing there when his phone rang. Sherry's number. It's done, he answered. What? Who is this? It's your husband, the one who's supposed to be dead right now. Clint? I don't understand. Your hit squad failed, Sherry. All 3 of them are dead. The silence on the other end was absolute. I know about the life insurance policy, Clint continued. I know you hired Tony Ballard to kill me. I know everything. You can't prove any of that. I don't need to prove it. I just need to survive it. Clint, please. You don't understand. Javier said you're going to kill us both. He said the only way to protect the baby was to stop lying to me. Clint's voice echoed through the destroyed room. I have recordings of your conversations with Ballard. I have financial records showing you paid him $50,000. Money you stole from our joint accounts to arrange my murder. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. We were just scared. You were destroying everything. And Javier said, Javier's dead too. Another silence. What? I killed him an hour ago, before your friends arrived. Did you really think I'd wait for you to take the initiative? It was a lie, but Clint needed Sherry to believe she was completely alone now, that every ally was gone, every safety net removed. You're a monster, she whispered. I'm a father protecting his daughter from people who wanted to kill him for insurance money. Clint hung up and immediately called Glenn Buchanan. I need you at my house now. Bring a criminal defense attorney. The good kind. Clint, what happened? 3 men just tried to kill me. They're all dead. And Glenn? Bring your camera. Document everything before I call the police. While waiting for his lawyer, Clint methodically photographed the crime scene, the weapons the attackers had carried, and the evidence of forced entry. His military training had included combat documentation. Sometimes proving you'd acted in self-defense was as important as surviving the attack itself. He also called Vernon Benjamin with specific instructions. Find Sherry and Javier. I want to know where they are every minute of every day. And Vernon, if they try to run, stop them. How exactly do you want me to stop them? Any way necessary. By dawn, Clint's house was crawling with police investigators, crime scene technicians, and reporters who'd caught wind of the story. The headline would read, Local security consultant kills 3 home invaders in deadly late-night attack. What the headlines wouldn't mention was the war behind the war. The systematic destruction of one family by forces that cared nothing for law, morality, or human life. Detective Simon Rutherford, the lead investigator, was a former military police officer who understood violence in ways civilian cops often didn't. This was professional work, he told Clint after examining the bodies. These weren't burglars or random criminals. Someone paid good money for this hit. Any idea who? Working on it. But Colonel, whoever wanted you dead, they're going to be very unhappy that their investment didn't pay off. As the bodies were removed and the investigators finished their work, Clint stood in his destroyed living room and faced a terrible truth. He'd won this battle, but the war was far from over. Somewhere in the city, his wife was planning her next move. And this time, she wouldn't make the mistake of hiring outside help. This time, it would be personal. Chapter 8, The Reckoning. The manhunt for Sherry and Javier lasted exactly 18 hours. Vernon Benjamin found them at a rundown motel near the airport, counting cash and discussing escape routes to non-extradition countries. But when Clint arrived at their location, he discovered they weren't alone. Through military-grade binoculars, he observed Beth Mooney, the family lawyer, helping them destroy documents in the motel's parking lot. A fourth person, a man he didn't recognize, was loading suitcases into a rental car. Who's the fourth man? Clint asked Vernon through their radio link. Run the plates, but I think it's Simon Rutherford. Clint's blood went cold. The detective investigating the home invasion was helping the people who'd orchestrated escape. How deep does this go? Deeper than we thought. I've been monitoring police communications. Rutherford's been feeding information to someone about your movements, your security measures, everything. The conspiracy was bigger than a cheating wife and her desperate boyfriend. Someone with resources and connections had been orchestrating events from the beginning. Clint made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Vernon, pull back to a safe distance and document everything. What happens next, I do alone. Clint, don't do anything stupid. I'm not going to do anything stupid. I'm going to do something necessary. He approached the motel from a blind side, using skills learned in urban warfare environments. The rental car was unlocked, and he quickly planted tracking devices and small explosive charges under the chassis, enough to disable the vehicle, not enough to kill the occupants. Then he waited. At 3:17 a.m., the 4 conspirators emerged from the motel room. Sherry was carrying a small suitcase and what appeared to be a thick envelope of documents. Javier had a duffel bag that clinked when he moved, probably containing weapons. Detective Rutherford was talking on a secure phone, coordinating something with an unknown party. Beth Mooney was destroying papers in a small fire they'd lit in the parking lot. Clint had seen enough. He triggered the first explosive as they reached the car, disabling the engine and trapping them in the parking lot. Then he stepped out of the shadows with his weapon drawn. Nobody move. Javier spun toward him, reaching for something in his jacket. Clint put 2 bullets in his chest before the man could draw his weapon. Javier! Sherry screamed, dropping to her knees beside her dying lover. Detective Rutherford, Clint said conversationally. I'm disappointed. I thought you were one of the good ones. Rutherford's hand was moving toward his service weapon. Stout, you're under arrest for... The 3rd bullet ended his sentence permanently. Beth Mooney was hyperventilating, backed against the motel wall with her hands raised. Please don't kill me. I was just providing legal services. I didn't know they were trying to murder you. What documents were you destroying? Insurance papers, financial records, adoption forms. Show me. With trembling hands, Beth retrieved a partially burned file from the fire. Clint scanned the contents by flashlight, his anger building with each page. The conspiracy went back 18 months. Sherry and Javier had been planning his murder since before Emma was born, setting up financial instruments that would transfer his wealth to them upon his death. The relinquishment papers were part of a larger plan to erase his legal connection to Emma, making it easier for them to disappear with her after his death. But the most damaging document was a medical report showing that Emma wasn't his biological daughter. DNA testing arranged by Javier had confirmed that he was Emma's real father. Sherry had been cheating far longer than anyone suspected. Clint felt something break inside him, not just his heart, but his entire sense of reality. The little girl he'd loved and protected wasn't even his daughter. Everything he believed about his family was a lie. Clint, Sherry whispered from beside Javier's body. Please, I can explain everything. Explain what? That you've been lying to me for 5 years. That you let me believe Emma was mine while planning to murder me for insurance money. Emma is yours in every way that matters. You raised her. You love her. Stop talking. Clint studied his wife's face in the dim parking lot light. She was still beautiful, still carrying herself with the confidence that had attracted him 15 years ago. But now he could see the calculating intelligence behind her eyes, the cold planning that had orchestrated years of deception. The baby you're carrying, he said quietly. Is it mine or his? Does it matter now? Yes, it's yours. I swear on Emma's life, this baby is yours. Clint looked at the chaos around him. 2 dead bodies, a terrified lawyer, his pregnant wife kneeling in blood and motor oil. He could kill them both and claim self-defense. He had justification, evidence, and the resources to make it look clean. But something held him back. Maybe it was the memory of Emma's laughter, or the thought of his unborn child, or simply the recognition that some lines, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. Beth, he said to the lawyer, get in your car and drive away. If you ever mention what happened here, I'll find you. What about the police? Detective Rutherford died in the line of duty, attempting to arrest dangerous fugitives. Very tragic. After Beth fled, Clint turned back to Sherry. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to confess to everything, the affair, the theft, the murder conspiracy, all of it. You're going to give me full custody of Emma, and you're going to disappear. And if I don't, then I finish what your hit squad started, and I make it look like Javier killed you before I killed him. Sherry looked at the bodies around her, understanding finally that she'd lost everything. What about the baby? When it's born, we'll do a DNA test. If it's mine, you can have supervised visitation. If it's not, Clint let the implication hang in the air. You'd kill your own child? It wouldn't be my child. By dawn, the crime scene had been sanitized and the official story established. Detective Rutherford had died attempting to arrest fugitive suspects in a murder conspiracy. Javier Barker had been killed while resisting arrest. Sherry Stout had confessed to fraud, adultery, and conspiracy to commit murder. She would serve 15 years in prison, losing all parental rights and financial claims. Emma would remain with her father, never knowing the truth about her parentage. And Clint Stout would live with the knowledge that everything he believed about love, family, and loyalty had been a carefully constructed lie. Chapter 9. The Unforgiven. 2 years later, Clint stood in the visiting room of Millfield Women's Correctional Facility, watching his ex-wife through bulletproof glass. Sherry had aged badly in prison. Her hair was streaked with premature gray, and her once bright eyes had dulled to flat resignation. She was holding a baby, their son, Michael, born 3 months after the trial ended. The DNA test had confirmed Clint's paternity, but he felt no connection to the child who'd been conceived in betrayal and born in captivity. "He has your eyes," Sherry said through the intercom, holding Michael up to the glass. Clint studied the baby's face with clinical detachment. "He has eyes. That's about all I can say. Don't you want to hold him?" "No. Clint, please. I know what I did was unforgivable, but Michael is innocent. He's your son. My son died the day I learned Emma wasn't mine." The words hit Sherry like physical blows. "Emma still loves you. She asks about you every day. Emma doesn't know who I am. She thinks I'm her father. Better to keep it that way." Since the trial, Emma had been living with Clint's sister in Oregon, told that Daddy was working overseas and would visit when he could. It was a lie, but kinder than the truth, that Clint couldn't look at her without remembering everything he'd lost. "The adoption papers are ready," Sherry said quietly. "If you sign them, Michael becomes a ward of the state. He'll be adopted by a loving family. And if I don't, then he grows up visiting his mother in prison and wondering why his father never comes to see him." Clint had spent 2 years wrestling with this decision. Michael was innocent of his mother's crimes, but he was also a living reminder of the greatest betrayal in Clint's life. Every time he looked at the boy, he saw Sherry's lies, Javier's manipulation, and his own failure to protect what mattered most. "I'll sign the papers," he said finally. Sherry's composure cracked, tears streaming down her face. "How can you do this? How can you abandon your own child? The same way you abandoned yours when you decided to kill me for insurance money. I've apologized 1,000 times. I've begged for forgiveness. What more can I do?" Clint leaned forward, his gray eyes as cold as Arctic ice. "You can understand that some things can't be forgiven. Some betrayals are too deep, some lies too fundamental. You didn't just cheat on me, Sherry. You rewrote our entire history. You made me love a child who wasn't mine while planning to murder me for money. Emma was yours in every way that mattered." "Stop." Clint's voice cut through her protest like a blade. "You don't get to redefine parenthood after lying about it for 5 years. You don't get to claim emotional connections after proving that money was more important than family." He stood up, preparing to leave. "Wait," Sherry called desperately. "There's something else. Something I never told you. I don't want to hear any more lies. The life insurance policy, I never meant to go through with killing you. Javier convinced me it was the only way to pay his debts, but I was going to call it off. I swear I was." Clint turned back, studying her face for any sign of honesty. The night you killed those men, I was on my way to meet with Tony Ballard to cancel everything when you called me." "Prove it." "I can't. But Clint, you have to believe me. I loved you. I still love you." "No," Clint said quietly. "You love what I could provide. Security, money, respectability. You love the idea of me, not the reality." "That's not true." "Then why did you sign those relinquishment papers for Emma? If you loved me, why were you willing to let another man adopt my daughter?" Sherry had no answer for that. As Clint walked toward the exit, she called after him one last time. "What about forgiveness? What about redemption? What about second chances?" He stopped but didn't turn around. "I used to believe in those things," he said. "I used to think that love was stronger than betrayal, that family was sacred, that people could change. You taught me otherwise. So this is it? You're going to hate me forever?" "No," Clint replied. "Hate requires emotional investment. I'm going to forget you ever existed." 6 months later, Clint received notification that the adoption had been finalized. Michael Stout was now Michael Patterson, son of a young couple in Colorado who'd been trying to have children for 8 years. Emma had also been adopted by his sister and her husband, taking their last name and slowly forgetting the man she'd once called Daddy. Clint sold his house, liquidated his assets, and disappeared into the private security world where men with his skills could work anonymously for clients who asked no questions about their pasts. He never remarried, never had other children, never allowed himself to trust another person with his heart. On quiet nights, when the weight of his choices pressed down like lead, he sometimes wondered if he'd gone too far, if his quest for justice had transformed him into something inhuman. But then he'd remember Emma crying in their living room, clutching papers that would have stolen her away from him, and he'd know that some betrayals left wounds that never healed. Some people deserved forgiveness. Others deserved exactly what they got. Clint Stout had learned to live with the difference. The Unforgiving explores the devastating consequences of betrayal and the dark places the human heart can go when love turns to vengeance. It asks difficult questions about justice, forgiveness, and whether some wounds are too deep to heal. In a world where trust is fragile and family bonds can be corrupted by greed and selfishness, sometimes the only choice left is to decide who deserves mercy and who deserves the consequences of their choices. Clint Stout chose consequences, and he never looked back. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Homecoming. The C-130 transport plane touched down at Fort Bragg with a mechanical groan that Andy Williamson had heard countless times over his 20-year military career. But this time was different. This was his final deployment, his last mission before retirement. At 42, Master Sergeant Andy Williamson was finally coming home for good. Andy had spent the better part of 2 decades serving his country in some of the world's most dangerous places. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, wherever Uncle Sam needed a man who could think fast, shoot straight, and lead others through hell. His weathered face bore the scars of shrapnel from an IED blast in Kandahar, and his steel-gray eyes had seen things that would break lesser men. But Andy wasn't a lesser man. He was a survivor, a strategist, and above all, a man who understood that loyalty was everything. The deployment had been brutal. 8 months in a classified location where the sun burned like a furnace and every shadow could hide death. But he'd endured it all with one thought keeping him sane: coming home to his wife Dana and their 18-year-old daughter Katie. Katie was graduating from high school today, and he'd moved heaven and earth to ensure his deployment ended in time for her ceremony. As he shouldered his duffel bag and walked across the tarmac, Andy felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. No more midnight raids, no more watching his back for insurgents, no more sleeping with one eye open. He was done. Time to be a husband and father again. The drive from Fort Bragg to their home in Fayetteville took 40 minutes, and Andy spent every second planning. He'd surprise them at Katie's graduation. Dana would be shocked to see him a day early, and Katie would finally have her father there for the most important day of her young life. He'd already arranged for flowers to be delivered to the ceremony. White roses for Katie, her favorite. Andy had met Dana Holloway 15 years ago at a military function. She was 25, beautiful in that Southern Belle way with honey blonde hair and green eyes that could stop traffic. He was a young sergeant then, cocky and full of ambition. Dana worked as a real estate agent and seemed to understand the demands of military life. Their courtship was brief but intense, and within 6 months they were married. Katie came along 2 years later, and Andy thought his life was complete. The little girl with her mother's blonde hair and his determined chin became the center of his universe. Even when deployments took him away for months at a time, he carried her picture everywhere and called home whenever possible. But military life was hard on families. Andy knew the statistics. Divorce rates among military couples were astronomical. He'd seen good men come home to empty houses and custody battles. He'd always told himself his family was different. Dana understood his duty, his commitment to serving something bigger than himself. They were solid. As he pulled into their driveway, Andy noticed several cars he didn't recognize, probably relatives gathering before the graduation ceremony. He smiled, thinking how perfect the timing was. He'd walk in and surprise everyone. The house was quiet as he used his key to enter through the front door. His dress uniform hung pristine in the bedroom closet. He'd had it pressed before deploying specifically for this day. As he changed into it, Andy felt proud. 20 years of service, numerous commendations, the respect of his peers. Katie would be proud to have him there in uniform. His phone buzzed just as he was adjusting his ribbons. Dana's name appeared on the screen. Perfect timing. "Hey, beautiful," Andy answered, his voice warm with anticipation. "Guess where I am?" The voice that came through the phone was cold, sharp, and filled with something that made Andy's blood freeze. "Don't you dare show up at that graduation in that stupid uniform," Dana hissed. "Katie doesn't want to see you. None of us do. You've been gone so long, you're basically a stranger. Stay away from our family." Andy felt the world tilt. The words hit him like physical blows. "Dana, what are you? You heard me. Don't embarrass us by showing up. Katie specifically said she doesn't want you there. Find somewhere else to go." For a moment, Andy couldn't speak. 20 years of marriage, 18 years of being Katie's father. And this was his homecoming? The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of his heart breaking. Finally, Andy spoke. His voice was calm, controlled, the same tone he'd used when calling in airstrikes on enemy positions. "No problem." He hung up and sat heavily on the bed, staring at his reflection in the dresser mirror. The man looking back at him was a stranger, older, harder, with eyes that had seen too much. But Dana was wrong about one thing. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was something far more dangerous, a soldier with nothing left to lose. Andy pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for, Frankie Sanchez. Frankie was his old team leader, a man who'd left the military 5 years ago and now ran a successful security consulting firm. More importantly, Frankie owed Andy his life from an incident in Fallujah that they'd never spoken about afterward. "Frankie," Andy said when his friend answered. "It's Andy. I need a favor. The big kind. Andy, brother. Thought you were still deployed. What do you need?" "Information. Complete surveillance package on Dana Williamson and anyone she's been spending time with. I need to know everything. Where she goes, who she sees, what she does when she thinks no one's watching." "And Frankie?" "I need it yesterday." There was a pause. Frankie knew better than to ask questions when Andy used that tone. "Consider it done. I'll have my best people on it within the hour." "Andy, you okay, man?" "I'm about to be." Andy hung up and began methodically removing his dress uniform. Each ribbon, each insignia carefully placed in its case. 20 years of service, 20 years of honor and sacrifice. And for what? To come home to betrayal? As he changed into civilian clothes, Andy's mind was already working, planning, strategizing. He'd learned long ago that emotional decisions led to dead soldiers. Cold calculation kept you alive and helped you win. And Andy Williamson had never lost a war. He walked to his study and pulled out a leather portfolio he'd kept locked away for years. Inside were documents, contacts, and resources most civilians couldn't imagine. Assets from his years in special operations, favors owed, networks of people who could make things happen or make things disappear. Andy sat at his desk and began making a list. By the time the sun set on Katie's graduation day, he would know exactly what he was dealing with, and then he would plan accordingly. Because Andy Williamson didn't forgive. He didn't forget, and he never, ever lost. Chapter 2. The Discovery. 23 missed calls. Andy stared at his phone display, watching the voicemails pile up like artillery shells. Dana's name dominated the screen, but there were others too, numbers he didn't recognize, including one labeled Rivers Law Firm. It had been 12 hours since he'd made the call to Frankie. 12 hours since he'd spoken those two simple words, "No problem." Now his phone was exploding with desperate attempts to reach him, and Andy finally understood why. The first voicemail was from Dana, her voice no longer cold, but panicked. "Andy, please call me back. We need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding." The second was more frantic. "Andy, where are you? I've been calling all night. Katie's asking about you." By the 10th message, Dana was crying. By the 20th, she was begging. But it was the message from Stan Rivers, attorney at law, that made Andy smile for the first time in 24 hours. "Mr. Williamson, This is Stan Rivers representing your wife. Please contact my office immediately. There are urgent matters we need to discuss regarding asset protection and other concerns. Time is of the essence. Andy deleted all the messages without listening to the rest and made himself coffee. Real coffee, not the bitter swill they serve in the field. As he sat at his kitchen table, he spread out the files Frankie had delivered at dawn. The surveillance photos told a story that made Andy's jaw clench. Dana wasn't alone in any of them. The man with her was tall, well-dressed, and handsome in a way that suggested he'd never worked a day of hard labor in his life. The timestamps showed a pattern going back over a year. Lunches that ran late into the afternoon, evening meetings at upscale hotels, weekend trips when Andy was deployed. The man's name was Mitch Head, and his background check revealed exactly what Andy had expected. 38 years old, divorced real estate developer who specialized in luxury properties. Clean credit, no criminal record, and a reputation for charming wealthy women. He'd been married twice before, both marriages ending when he moved on to more profitable opportunities. The financial records Frankie had obtained through less than legal means painted an even uglier picture. Dana had been siphoning money from their joint accounts for months, hiding it in accounts that bore only her name. She'd also been using their home equity line of credit for what appeared to be vacations and expensive gifts, items Andy had never seen. But it was the recorded conversations that truly opened Andy's eyes to the depth of the betrayal. He'll never leave the military. Dana's voice was clear through the surveillance equipment Frankie's team had planted. He's too much a Boy Scout. But after this deployment, he'll be eligible for retirement. That's when we make our move. Mitch's voice was smooth, confident. And you're sure he doesn't suspect anything? Please. Andy's so focused on duty and honor, he'd never think to look. Besides, Katie's almost 18. Once she graduates, we can push him out completely. He'll be devastated about losing his daughter, and he'll just disappear. Probably re-enlist or something. What about the house? The assets? Already handled. I've been moving everything into my name gradually. By the time he realizes what's happening, it'll be too late to stop us. My lawyer says. Andy had heard enough. He closed the file and leaned back in his chair, processing the magnitude of their betrayal. They hadn't just been having an affair. They'd been planning to destroy him completely. To take everything he'd worked for and leave him with nothing. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated who they were dealing with. Andy opened his laptop and began researching. Mitch's head might look clean on the surface, but every man had secrets. And Andy knew how to find them. Within 2 hours, he'd uncovered the truth about Mitch's business practices. The man wasn't just a real estate developer. He was a predator who specialized in identifying vulnerable women with assets, seducing them, and then systematically draining their resources before moving on to the next target. Dana wasn't his first married victim, and she wouldn't be his last. The pattern was always the same. Charm the wife while the husband was distracted or absent. Convince her that she deserved better, that her current life was holding her back. Help her hide assets for her protection. Then, once the divorce was finalized and he'd gained access to half the marital property, he'd disappear with everything, leaving the woman devastated and broke. And he found court records from 3 previous cases. Each time, Mitch had walked away clean while his victims were left with nothing. The system protected men like him, smart enough to stay within the legal boundaries, charming enough to convince others he was the victim when things went wrong. But Andy wasn't the system. He was something far more dangerous. His phone rang, interrupting his research. Katie's name appeared on the screen. For a moment, Andy hesitated. His daughter had been turned against him, poisoned by her mother's lies. But she was still his little girl. Dad. Katie's voice was small, uncertain. Mom said you were back, but that you didn't want to see me. Is that true? And he closed his eyes, feeling rage build in his chest like a nuclear reactor approaching critical mass. Katie, sweetheart, that's not true. I came home specifically for your graduation. I wanted nothing more than to be there with you. But Mom said, your mother said a lot of things, honey, but I need you to listen to me very carefully. I love you more than anything in this world. That will never change, no matter what anyone tells you. Do you understand? There was silence on the other end, then the sound of crying. I don't understand what's happening, Dad. Everything's been so weird lately. Mom's been acting strange, and there's this man who's been coming around. What man, Katie? His name is Mitch something. Mom says he's helping with the house or something, but he's always here when you're gone. And yesterday, I heard them talking about you not coming back. Andy's grip on the phone tightened. Katie, I need you to listen to me. Can you get away from the house today? Maybe go to your friend Cindy's. I guess so. Why? Because some things are about to change, and I don't want you to be caught in the middle. Can you do that for me? Dad, you're scaring me. Don't be scared, sweetheart. Just remember that I love you, and no matter what happens, that will never change. Can you promise me you'll stay away from the house tonight? Okay, Dad. I promise. After Katie hung up, Andy sat in the silence of his kitchen, surrounded by evidence of the most profound betrayal he'd ever experienced. His wife had sold him out for a smooth-talking con man. His daughter had been poisoned against him. Everything he'd fought for, everything he'd sacrificed for, had been systematically dismantled while he was serving his country. But Dana and Mitch had made one fatal error in their calculations. They thought they were dealing with a simple soldier, a man bound by rules and honor and conventional thinking. They were wrong. Andy Williamson had spent 20 years learning how to identify targets, how to plan operations, and how to execute missions with surgical precision. He'd been trained by the best military minds in the world to think like a weapon, to be patient, to strike when the enemy least expected it. Dana and Mitch had just declared war on the wrong man. Andy picked up his phone and began making calls. Not to lawyers or counselors or any of the conventional resources a normal husband might use. Instead, he called numbers that didn't appear in any directory, spoke to people who operated in the shadows between legal and illegal, between justice and revenge. By sunset, Andy had assembled a team. By midnight, he would begin the most important mission of his career, the mission to destroy anyone who had betrayed him. Chapter 3. The Setup. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Fayetteville had been empty for 3 years, a casualty of the recession that had hit the area hard. To most people, it was just another eyesore. To Andy Williamson, it was the perfect command center. He arrived at 0600 hours, just as the sun was painting the sky blood red. Frankie Sanchez was already there, along with 3 other men Andy recognized from the old days. They were the kind of soldiers who didn't exist on paper anymore, operators who'd done the jobs that governments denied and civilians couldn't imagine. Hell of a setup you've got here, said Harvey McLean, a massive man with arms like tree trunks and scars that told stories he'd never share. Harvey had been Andy's demolitions expert in Afghanistan, a man who could make a building collapse with surgical precision or level a city block if the situation called for it. Reminds me of that op in Damascus, added Devin Griffith, unpacking electronic equipment from a steel case. Devin was pure genius when it came to surveillance and electronic warfare. If it had wires, circuits, or transmitted a signal, Devin could control it, crack it, or make it disappear entirely. The 4th man was Owen Downs, and his presence made Andy's plan exponentially more dangerous. Owen didn't look like much. Average height, thinning hair, the kind of face you'd forget 5 minutes after meeting him. But Owen was a cleaner, a man who specialized in making problems disappear permanently. Andy had called him last, and only after much consideration. So, Frankie said, setting up a tactical planning board, what's the target package? Andy spread the surveillance photos across a folding table. Dana Williamson, my wife. And this piece of shit. He tapped Mitch Head's photo hard enough to leave a fingerprint. They've been planning to destroy me for over a year. Stealing money, poisoning my daughter against me, preparing to take everything I've worked for. Divorce lawyers getting expensive these days? Harvey asked with a dark chuckle. This isn't about divorce, Andy said, his voice dropping to the tone that had made enemy fighters surrender rather than face him in combat. This is about consequences. These people think they can betray someone like me and walk away clean. They're wrong. He pulled out a detailed map of Fayetteville and began placing markers. Mitch Head lives in a Meadowbrook development, big house on Riverside Drive. Dana will be there with him tonight. Our surveillance confirms they've been meeting there 3 times a week while I was deployed. What's the objective? Devin asked, already mentally cataloging the electronic warfare possibilities. Total destruction, Andy said simply. I want their lives dismantled piece by piece. Their reputations, their finances, their relationships, their sense of security. I want them to understand what it feels like to lose everything. Owen spoke for the first time, his voice quiet and professional. How permanent are we talking? And he met his eyes. That depends on how well they learn their lesson. For the next hour, Andy laid out his plan. It was complex, multifaceted, and designed to hit every aspect of his target's lives simultaneously. Phase 1 would be psychological, making them understand they were being watched, that their secrets were no longer safe. Phase 2 would be financial, destroying their ability to profit from their betrayal. Phase 3 would depend on how they responded to the first two phases. Devin, I need you to get into all their electronic communications. Every phone call, every text message, every email. I want to know what they're planning before they know it themselves. Easy enough. Give me 48 hours. Harvey, I need you to handle the physical security at both locations. Nothing that could hurt innocent people, but I want them to feel vulnerable in their own homes. Roger that. Subtle intimidation or full psychological warfare. Start subtle. We can escalate if necessary. Frankie, you're coordinating surveillance. I want to know everywhere they go, everyone they see, every conversation they have. My people are already in position. Owen, Andy paused, looking at the cleaner. I need you on standby, just in case things go sideways. Owen nodded without expression. In their world, backup plans often involved making problems disappear permanently. What about the daughter? Frankie asked. Katie, right? Andy's expression softened for just a moment. She's off limits. Completely. She's been manipulated by her mother, but she's still my little girl. Anyone who touches her answers to me personally. The team spent the rest of the morning going over technical details, contingency plans, and escape routes. These men had worked together in situations where failure meant death, and they operated with the kind of precision that only came from absolute trust. At 1,400 hours, Andy's phone rang. Dana's name appeared on the screen, and he gestured for silence before answering. Hello, Dana. Andy, thank God. Where have you been? I've been trying to reach you for hours. Her voice was strained, desperate in a way Andy had never heard before. I've been busy. What do you need? We need to talk. There's been a terrible misunderstanding about yesterday. I was upset about other things, and I took it out on you. It wasn't fair. Andy almost smiled. Frankie's preliminary surveillance had already rattled them. What kind of other things? Just stress. Work stuff. Look, can you meet me for dinner tonight? Somewhere quiet where we can talk. I don't think that's a good idea, Dana. You made your feelings pretty clear yesterday. Please, Andy. I know how this must look, but there are things you don't understand. Things I need to explain. Such as, there was a long pause. I can't discuss it over the phone. Meet me at Romano's at 7. Please. Andy looked around at his team, all of whom were listening to the conversation. Devin was already tracing the call, and Harvey was grinning like a shark who'd smell blood. All right, Andy said finally. Romano's at 7. But Dana, if this is some kind of game, if you're planning something, you should know that I'm not the same man who left for deployment. Prison changes people. Combat changes them more. He hung up before she could respond, leaving her to wonder what he meant by that cryptic comment. Nicely played, Frankie said. Plant the seed that you might be unstable. Make them nervous about what you're capable of. Who says I'm not? Andy replied, and the silence that followed was profound. The afternoon passed quickly as the team dispersed to their assignments. Devin disappeared with enough electronic equipment to outfit a small army. Harvey vanished like smoke, though Andy knew he was already scouting both target locations. Owen simply walked away without a word, becoming invisible in a way that only true professionals could manage. At 1800 hours, Andy returned to his house to prepare for dinner. The place felt different now, violated, contaminated by the knowledge of what had been happening while he was gone. He showered and dressed carefully, choosing clothes that would make him look like the conventional military husband Dana expected. But concealed beneath his jacket was a recording device, and in his pocket was a phone that would transmit everything directly to Devin's monitoring station. By the end of the evening, they would have enough evidence to destroy both Dana and Mitch in any court in the country. Assuming, of course, that Andy decided to let the courts handle it. Romano's restaurant was exactly the kind of place Dana would choose. Upscale enough to feel safe, public enough to prevent any dramatic confrontations. Andy arrived 5 minutes early and chose a table with clear sight lines to all exits, a habit that had kept him alive in a dozen foreign countries. Dana arrived precisely on time, and Andy had to admit she looked good. She'd chosen a dress that emphasized her figure without being obvious about it, and her makeup was flawless. She was pulling out all the stops, trying to remind him of what he'd be losing if he didn't play along with her plan. "Andy," she said, leaning in to kiss his cheek. "You look good. A little thin, maybe, but good." "Deployment food will do that to you," Andy replied, standing to pull out her chair like the gentleman she expected him to be. They ordered drinks, wine for her, coffee for him, and made small talk about Katie's graduation, his travel home, the weather. Dana was working up to something, and Andy was content to let her take the lead. "Andy," she said finally, reaching across the table to touch his hand, "I owe you an apology. What I said yesterday was inexcusable. I was under a lot of stress, and I took it out on you." "What kind of stress?" Dana's smile flickered for just a moment. "Work stress. Money stress. You know how it is when you're deployed. Everything falls on me. The house, Katie, all the decisions. Sometimes I feel overwhelmed." "I see. And that justified telling me to stay away from my daughter's graduation." "No, it didn't. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. But Andy, there are things happening that you don't know about. Things that affect all of us." Andy leaned back in his chair, studying his wife's face. "Such as, I've been getting some financial advice. About our future, about retirement planning. The advisor suggested that we might need to make some changes to protect our assets." "What kind of changes?" "Well, for instance, it might be better if some of our assets were in my name only. For tax reasons, and to protect them if something happened to you." Andy nodded as if this made perfect sense. "This financial advisor, do I know him?" Dana's cheeks flushed slightly. "His name is Mitch Head. He specializes in military families. He understands the unique challenges we face. I'd like to meet him." "Of course. In fact, he suggested that the three of us should sit down together soon. He has some ideas that could really benefit our family." Andy smiled, and for just a moment, Dana relaxed. She thought she was winning, thought she was successfully manipulating him into her trap. She had no idea that every word she'd spoken was being recorded, analyzed, and added to a growing file that would destroy her completely. "That sounds great," Andy said, raising his coffee cup in a mock toast. "To new beginnings." "To new beginnings," Dana agreed, clinking her wine glass against his cup. As they finished dinner, Andy's phone buzzed with a text from Devin. Phase 1 was complete. In the next 24 hours, Dana and Mitch would discover that their private conversations weren't private anymore. Their financial transactions were being monitored, and their carefully laid plans were about to become very public knowledge. Andy paid the check and walked Dana to her car, playing the role of the concerned husband perfectly. He kissed her goodnight and promised to call tomorrow about meeting with Mitch. But as he watched her drive away, Andy's expression shifted back to the cold, calculating look of a predator who'd just cornered his prey. The war had officially begun. Chapter 4, First Strike. The text message arrived at 0347 hours. Package delivered. Subjects are awake. Andy smiled in the darkness of his temporary command post. Harvey's first move had been subtle but effective. A brief power outage at Mitch Head's house, followed by the sound of someone testing doors and windows. Nothing criminal, nothing traceable, just enough to make two guilty people understand that they were no longer safe in their sanctuary. By 0600, Devin had intercepted 17 phone calls between Dana and Mitch, each more panicked than the last. "Someone was outside my house last night." Mitch's voice was tight with fear on the recording. "I heard footsteps, saw shadows. When I looked out, the street was empty, but I know someone was there. Maybe it was just—" "No, Dana, this isn't coincidence. Your husband comes back, and suddenly I'm being watched. He knows something, and he doesn't know anything. He's not smart enough to." Your husband is Special Forces, Dana. These people are trained to kill with their bare hands. What if he's planning something? Andy had to admire Mitch's intuition. The man was a predator himself, which made him more sensitive to being hunted. Unfortunately for him, that same predatory instinct had made him overconfident. At 0800, Andy walked into the offices of Rivers' law firm, the same legal practice that had left him a voicemail. The receptionist, a young woman named Sherry Morris, looked up with a professional smile. "I'm here to see Stan Rivers," Andy said. "Andy Williamson." The smile faltered. "Mr. Williamson? Please have a seat. I'll let Mr. Rivers know you're here." Within 30 seconds, a nervous-looking man in an expensive suit appeared. Stan Rivers was exactly what Andy had expected. Mid-40s, soft around the middle, the kind of lawyer who specialized in separating military men from their assets. "Mr. Williamson, thank you for coming in. I've been trying to reach you. I got a message. You said there were urgent matters to discuss." Rivers led Andy into a conference room and closed the door. "Yes, well, your wife came to me with some concerns about asset protection. She seemed to think you might be unstable since returning from deployment." "Unstable how?" "PTSD, anger management issues, that sort of thing." She was worried about her safety and wanted to ensure that the family assets were protected. Andy nodded thoughtfully. "I see. And you agreed to help her?" "Well, yes. When a military spouse expresses concerns about domestic violence." "Have there been any reports of domestic violence, Mr. Rivers?" "No, but any police reports? Hospital visits? Evidence of any kind that I've ever laid a hand on my wife?" Rivers shifted uncomfortably. "No, but these situations can escalate quickly. So if you decided to help my wife steal my assets based on her word alone, without investigating, without talking to me, without any evidence whatsoever." "Mr. Williamson, I resent the implication." Andy leaned forward, and his voice dropped to a whisper that made Rivers's blood freeze. "Mr. Rivers, I've spent 20 years serving my country. I've been shot, blown up, and decorated for valor under fire. I've never once struck my wife, threatened her, or given her any reason to fear for her safety. But you've chosen to help her commit what amounts to theft of marital assets based on nothing but her lies." Rivers was sweating now. "If there's been a misunderstanding." "Oh, there's definitely been a misunderstanding. You see, you thought you were dealing with some broken-down veteran who'd roll over and let you steal his life. You're wrong." Andy stood and placed a folder on the table. "That's a complete financial analysis of every transaction my wife has made in the past year. Every hidden account, every asset transfer, every dollar she's stolen. Your fingerprints are all over the legal documents." Rivers opened the folder and went pale. "How did you?" "I also have recordings of conversations between my wife and her lover discussing their plan to defraud me. Conversations where they specifically mention your cooperation in hiding assets." "Mr. Williamson, I can explain. You can explain it to the North Carolina State Bar Association. I'll be filing complaints about your unethical conduct this afternoon." Andy headed for the door, then paused. "Oh, and Mr. Rivers, you might want to review your malpractice insurance. Something tells me you're going to need it." By 1,000 hours, Andy was parked across the street from Head Development Corporation, Mitch's real estate company. The building was modern glass and steel, the kind of flashy facade that impressed clients but cost a fortune to maintain. Through his binoculars, Andy could see Mitch pacing in his corner office, phone pressed to his ear. Andy's own phone buzzed with an update from Devin. "Financial records show Head Development is leveraged to the hilt. Company's been operating on credit and investor funds for the past 6 months. One major deal falls through, and the whole thing collapses." Perfect. Andy had been wondering how to hit Mitch where it would hurt most. Now he knew. At 11:30, Andy walked into the offices of Meadowbrook Planning Commission, where Mitch's latest development project was pending approval. The receptionist directed him to the office of Commissioner Vicky Lim, a stern-looking woman in her 50s. "Commissioner Lim, I'm Andy Williamson. I believe you have a development proposal pending from Head Development Corporation." "Yes, the Riverside Estates project. 30 luxury homes on the river. Are you a neighbor?" "Something like that. I wonder if you've had a chance to review Mr. Head's background thoroughly." "The standard checks were done. Business license, financial statements, that sort of thing." Andy placed another folder on her desk. You might want to look at this. It's a complete history of Mr. Head's previous developments, including the ones that were never completed, the investors who were defrauded, and the environmental violations that were covered up. Commissioner Lim opened the folder and began reading. Her expression grew more serious with each page. Where did you get this information? Public records, mostly. It just takes knowing where to look. Mr. Head has a pattern of starting projects, collecting investor money, and then disappearing when problems arise. The Riverside project will be no different. This is very concerning. If even half of this is true, it's all documented. But there's more. Andy pulled out a second folder. Environmental impact studies from the proposed site. Did you know there's an underground stream running directly through the property? And that building on it would violate 3 different EPA regulations. Commissioner Lim was now fully engaged, making notes as she read. Mr. Williamson, I think we need to call an emergency session to review this application. That would be appropriate. Of course, if word gets out that the commission is reconsidering the project, it might affect Mr. Head's ability to secure financing. Andy left the planning office with the satisfaction of knowing that Mitch's major source of income was about to evaporate. But he wasn't done yet. At 1,400 hours, Andy paid a visit to First National Bank, where Mitch held his primary business accounts. Andy had called ahead, using his military credentials and a few carefully placed references to arrange a meeting with the bank president, Tommy Roth. Mr. Williamson, it's an honor to meet you. Your service record is impressive. Thank you, Mr. Roth. I'm here about a potential fraud issue involving one of your commercial clients. Oh, Andy spread out financial documents on Roth's desk. Mitch Head has been using fraudulent income statements to secure loans. These documents show his real financial situation versus what he's reported to your bank. Roth studied the papers carefully. These discrepancies are significant. If this is accurate, Mr. Head has been in violation of his loan agreements for months. There's more. He's been using the funds to finance a personal lifestyle rather than the business development he claimed. That includes expensive trips, luxury purchases, and gifts for women he's been involved with. Including married women? Including my wife. Roth's expression hardened. First National had a reputation to maintain, and being associated with fraud and adultery was not good for business. Mr. Williamson, I'll need to verify this information, but if it's accurate, we'll be calling Mr. Head's loans immediately. I understand completely. Thank you for your time. By 1,600 hours, Andy was back at his command post, reviewing the day's progress. In 8 hours, he had triggered investigations that would destroy Mitch's legal representation, his major development project, and his business financing. But the day's most important operation was still to come. At 1800, Dana would be meeting Mitch at his house for their regular rendezvous. They would be feeling desperate now, frightened by the previous night's events and panicked by the legal and financial problems that had suddenly materialized. Desperate people made mistakes, and Andy was counting on a very specific mistake. His phone buzzed with a text from Harvey. Subjects are meeting as predicted. Package is in position. Andy smiled. Phase 2 was about to begin. Chapter 5, The Trap. The surveillance footage was crystal clear. At exactly 18:03 hours, Dana's BMW pulled into Mitch Head's driveway, and she practically ran to the front door. Her body language screamed panic, shoulders hunched, constantly looking over her shoulder, moving with the jerky urgency of someone who knew they were being hunted. From his position in the abandoned warehouse, Andy watched the feed from 6 different cameras that Devin had placed around Mitch's property. High-definition video, directional audio, thermal imaging. Nothing was left to chance. She's scared, Frankie observed, watching Dana disappear into the house. She should be, Andy replied, his voice carrying the cold satisfaction of a predator who'd successfully driven his prey exactly where he wanted them. Inside the house, the audio surveillance was picking up every word. This is insane, Mitch was saying, his usual confidence replaced by barely controlled fear. Someone's targeting us specifically. The bank called this morning talking about loan irregularities. The Planning Commission is reviewing my project, and my lawyer says he can't represent me anymore because of some ethical conflict. What do you mean, ethical conflict? Dana's voice was shrill. Stan Rivers says he can't represent both of us because Andy came to see him today. He had documents, Dana. Financial records, recordings, things that should have been impossible to get. There was a long pause, then Dana spoke in a whisper. How much does he know? Everything. He knows about us, about the money transfers, about the divorce plan. The question is what he's planning to do about it. Andy smiled grimly. What he was planning to do was far worse than anything they could imagine. On the monitor, Andy watched as Harvey's thermal signature approached the house from the rear. The big man moved like a ghost, despite his size, decades of covert operations having taught him how to navigate hostile territory without detection. Harvey's in position, Devin reported. All surveillance equipment is active, and the subjects are in the target zone. Execute Phase 2 Alpha, Andy ordered. What happened next was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Harvey began with something simple, the sound of someone walking on the roof. Not running, not trying to break in, just the steady, deliberate footsteps of someone who wanted to be heard. Inside the house, Dana and Mitch froze. What was that? Dana whispered. Chill. Mitch was moving toward the window, trying to see outside. There's someone up there. The footsteps stopped, and for 30 seconds there was silence. Then they resumed, this time moving from the roof to the side of the house, as if someone was climbing down. Call the police, Dana hissed. And tell them what? That my married girlfriend and I heard footsteps while we were planning to defraud her husband. Andy had to admire Mitch's tactical thinking, even while despising the man himself. Calling the police would create a record, questions that neither of them wanted to answer. Phase 2 Bravo began with the lights. Every light in the house went out simultaneously, plunging Dana and Mitch into total darkness. Emergency power kicked in 30 seconds later, but those 30 seconds were enough to send both targets into full panic mode. Someone cut the power, Mitch said, his voice tight with fear. This isn't random. Someone is specifically targeting us. It's Andy, Dana said, and for the first time she sounded absolutely certain. He knows. Oh God, he knows everything. Phase 2 Charlie was the most subtle and perhaps the most effective. Devin had hacked into Mitch's home security system, and now he began manipulating it in ways that would drive a guilty mind to paranoia. Motion sensors triggered at windows where no one was standing. Door sensors showed openings and closings that weren't happening. The security systems recorded voice announced front door open and rear door open and motion detected in master bedroom in an endless cycle of false alerts. The system's malfunctioning, Mitch said, but his voice carried no conviction. Or someone's hacking it, Dana replied. And he was always good with computers. And he wasn't particularly good with computers, but he didn't need to be. He had Devin, and Devin was an artist. For 20 minutes, Harvey continued the psychological assault. Footsteps that started and stopped. Shadows that moved past windows. The sound of someone testing door handles, trying locks, tapping on glass. Never quite crossing the line into breaking and entering, but creating the overwhelming impression that the house was surrounded by hostile forces. Inside, Dana and Mitch were falling apart. We have to call the police, Dana said again. We can't. Don't you understand? If Andy has evidence of what we've been doing, if he has recordings, the police won't help us. They'll arrest us. Then what do? We run. Tonight. We take whatever money we can access and disappear. What about Katie? What about her? She's 18, Dana. She's not a child anymore. Andy's hands clenched into fists. The casual way Mitch dismissed his daughter's importance revealed exactly what kind of man he was. Andy had known predators like this in war zones. Men who would use and discard anyone to save themselves. We can't just abandon her, Dana said, though her voice lacked conviction. She's not my problem. And if we stay, she'll have front row seats to watch us go to prison. Is that what you want? There was a long silence, and when Dana spoke again, Andy heard something die in her voice. How much money can we access tonight? Maybe $60,000 from my business accounts. Another 40 from your personal accounts. It's not much, but it's enough to disappear. Where would we go? I have contacts in Costa Rica. No extradition treaty, easy to buy new identities. We could be on a plane by morning. Andy had heard enough. His wife was planning to abandon their daughter, and flee the country with a con man. Any lingering doubts about the righteousness of his mission evaporated completely. "Devin," he said quietly, "are you getting all this?" "Every word, boss." Digital recording, backed up to multiple servers. "Good." Harvey, begin Phase 3. Phase 3 was when Andy stopped playing games. The front door of Mitch's house opened with a soft click. Not violently, not dramatically, just opened, as if someone had used a key. "Did you hear that?" Dana's voice was barely a whisper. "The front door just opened," Mitch said, his voice cracking. "Someone's in the house." They could hear footsteps now, steady and deliberate, moving through the first floor. Not trying to be quiet, not sneaking, walking with the confidence of someone who belonged there. "Back door," Mitch hissed. "We go out the back door." They moved toward the rear of the house, but before they could reach the exit, the back door opened as well. More footsteps coming from that direction. "We're trapped," Dana said, and Andy could hear tears in her voice. "The garage," Mitch said. "We can get to the car through the garage." They moved toward the connecting door to the garage, but when Mitch tried the handle, it wouldn't turn. The lock had been engaged from the other side. "It's locked," he said, rattling the handle desperately. "That's impossible. It doesn't lock from the garage side." But it did now, thanks to Harvey's modifications. The footsteps were getting closer, coming from both directions. Dana and Mitch were trapped in the central part of the house with nowhere to run. "Please," Dana called out into the darkness. "Whoever you are, we can work this out. We can pay you." The footsteps stopped. "Andy," Dana tried again. "Andy, if that's you, please. Let's talk about this. I know you're angry, but we can fix this." Silence. Then, from speakers throughout the house, Andy's voice filled the air. Not live. This was a recording Devin had prepared, played through the home sound system. "Dana, Mitch, you've been very busy while I was gone. Andy, please. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I was too stupid, too trusting, too broken down to see what you were doing?" Andy's recorded voice was calm, conversational, which somehow made it infinitely more terrifying than if he'd been shouting. "I know about the affair. I know about the money you've stolen. I know about your plan to destroy me and take everything I've worked for. I know about your plan to abandon my daughter and flee the country. We can explain. You can explain it to the FBI. I've already provided them with complete evidence of your fraud, your theft, and your conspiracy. They'll be here in the morning." This was a lie. Andy hadn't contacted the FBI yet, but Dana and Mitch didn't know that. "But that's tomorrow." The recording continued. "Tonight, you belong to me." The lights went out again, but this time they didn't come back on. In the command center, Andy stood up. "Harvey, Owen, time to go. Bring them to the warehouse." "Alive?" Owen asked. For now, Andy had spent weeks planning this moment, considering every angle, every possible outcome. Dana and Mitch had destroyed his family, stolen his money, and planned to abandon his daughter. They'd shown no remorse, no hesitation, no human decency. Now they would learn what happened when you betrayed Andy Williamson. The real lesson was about to begin. Chapter 6, The Reckoning. The warehouse was cold, echoing with the sound of metal chairs scraping against concrete as Harvey and Owen positioned their captives in the center of the empty space. Portable floodlights created a harsh circle of illumination, beyond which the shadows seemed to stretch into infinity. Dana and Mitch sat back to back, secured to their chairs with military-grade restraints. Neither was physically harmed. Andy had been very specific about that, but both were in a state of shock that bordered on catatonia. Andy emerged from the shadows, still wearing civilian clothes, but somehow looking more military than he had in his dress uniform. There was something in his posture, his movement, that spoke of violence held in careful check. "Hello, Dana," he said conversationally. "Mitch." Dana lifted her head, and Andy saw that she'd been crying. "Andy, please. Whatever you think we've done, I don't think anything. I know exactly what you've done." Andy walked slowly around their chairs, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. "The question is what to do about it." "Look, man," Mitch said, trying to project confidence despite his situation. "I don't know what Dana told you, but..." Andy stopped walking and stared at Mitch until the man's voice trailed off into silence. Mitch had 38 years old. Divorced twice. 3 previous convictions for fraud, all plea bargained down to misdemeanors. Currently under investigation by the IRS for tax evasion. Mitch's face went pale. How do you? I know everything about you, Mitch. Including the fact that Dana isn't your first married victim. You've been running this con for years. Find a military wife whose husband is deployed, seduce her, convince her to hide assets, then disappear with everything when the divorce is finalized. Andy pulled out a tablet and began reading from it. Sandra Morrison, divorced Marine captain, lost $300,000. Jennifer Walsh, divorced Army major, lost her house and custody of her children. Melissa Chun, divorced Air Force lieutenant colonel, lost everything and had a nervous breakdown. Each name hit Mitch like a physical blow. I don't know what you're talking about. Really? Because I have bank records, hotel receipts, and recorded phone conversations that say otherwise. Andy set the tablet down and picked up a manila folder. But my favorite piece of evidence is this. A recording from 3 weeks ago where you and Dana discussed the best way to break me psychologically after the divorce. Something about making sure I'd be too devastated to fight back. You played a few seconds of audio, and Dana's voice filled the warehouse. If we can make him think Katie hates him, he'll just disappear. He's the type who'd rather suffer alone than fight for something that might hurt his daughter. Dana was sobbing now. I never meant for it to go this far. I was confused. I wasn't thinking clearly. You meant every word, Andy said coldly. You've been planning this for over a year. Moving money, manipulating Katie, preparing to destroy everything I've worked for. The money, we can give back. All of it. Can you give me back my daughter's respect? Can you give me back 20 years of trust? Can you give me back the pride I felt when I thought I was coming home to a family that loved me? Andy's voice never rose above conversational level, but something in his tone made both captives flinch. Here's what's going to happen, Andy continued. Mitch, you're going to confess to defrauding every woman you victimized. You're going to make restitution to each of them, and you're going to disappear from North Carolina forever. And if I refuse? Andy smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Owen, show Mr. Head what happens to people who refuse. Owen stepped into the light, and Mitch saw him clearly for the first time. There was something about the man's face, his dead eyes, that spoke of violence as casual as breathing. I specialize in making problems disappear, Owen said quietly. Sometimes the problems are evidence. Sometimes they're witnesses. Sometimes they're people who refuse reasonable requests. Mitch swallowed hard. What? What kind of confession? Written, signed, witnessed, and notarized. Admitting to fraud, conspiracy, and conspiracy to commit adultery. With specific details about your methods and your other victims. That would destroy me legally. Yes, it would. But you'd be alive to face the consequences. Refuse, and I'll let Owen solve the problem his way. Mitch looked around the warehouse, taking in the isolation, the professional way he'd been captured, the obvious military precision of the operation. These weren't civilians playing games. These were men who'd done this sort of thing before in places where nobody would ever ask questions. I'll sign whatever you want, he said finally. Smart choice. Andy turned to Dana. Your situation is more complicated. Andy, I'm your wife, the mother of your daughter. Doesn't that mean anything? It meant everything, right up until you decided to throw it away for a con man and some stolen money. Andy pulled up another chair and sat facing her. For a moment, his expression softened, and Dana saw a glimpse of the man she'd married. Do you remember our wedding day? He asked. You promised to love me for better or worse, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer. Do you remember that? Yes, Dana whispered. I kept those promises. Through 4 deployments, through months of separation, through the nightmares and the injuries and all the things that come with military life. I kept my promises. I know you did. And you threw them away the first time some smooth talker convinced you that you deserve better. Andy stood up and began pacing again. But here's the thing, Dana. I'm not just angry about the affair. People make mistakes. Marriages fail, it happens. What I can't forgive is what you did to Katie. I never hurt Katie. You turned her against me. You poisoned her mind, made her think I didn't want to be at her graduation, convinced her that I was abandoning the family. You used our daughter as a weapon against me. Dana was crying harder now. I was scared. I thought if you found out about Mitch. So you decided to destroy my relationship with my daughter to protect your affair. You were willing to sacrifice everything she and I had together to save yourself. Andy knelt down, so he was at eye level with Dana. That's unforgivable. A man can survive losing his wife. He can survive losing his money, his house, his pride. But you try to take away my daughter. That's where you cross a line you can never uncross. What are you going to do? Andy stood up and walked back into the shadows. When he returned, he was carrying a briefcase. You're going to sign divorce papers, giving me full custody of Katie and admitting to adultery and fraud. You're going to liquidate every asset you've hidden and return every penny you've stolen. You're going to disappear from Katie's life completely. I can't abandon my daughter. You already did. The moment you decided to flee the country with Mitch. The only question now is whether you disappear voluntarily or involuntarily. Dana looked around the warehouse, seeing the same things Mitch had seen. The isolation, the professional setup, the men who moved like predators. And if I sign, you get to live. You get a head start before I turn the evidence over to the authorities. You get a chance to disappear somewhere that doesn't have an extradition treaty. How long? 24 hours. Andy opened the briefcase and pulled out legal documents that had obviously been prepared in advance. Every detail had been considered, every contingency planned for. These papers transfer everything back to me. House, bank accounts, investments, everything. They also include a confession to adultery and fraud, witness statements about your affair with Mitch, and a voluntary relinquishment of all parental rights. I can't sign away my daughter. You already have. You just haven't made it legal yet. For 20 minutes, Dana tried to negotiate to find some middle ground that would let her keep some connection to Katie. But Andy was implacable. She'd crossed the line when she'd used Katie as a weapon, and there was no going back. Finally, with Owen's dead eyes watching her every move, Dana signed the papers. Mitch had signed his confession an hour earlier, admitting to running elaborate fraud schemes against military wives and providing specific details that would allow law enforcement to prosecute him successfully. Excellent, Andy said, collecting the documents. Harvey, take them back to Mitch's house. Leave them there. Don't let them communicate with anyone. Don't let them take anything but basic clothes and identification. What about cars, money, phones? They can have one car and whatever cash they have in their wallets. Nothing else. And he turned back to his captives. You have 24 hours before I turn this evidence over to the FBI, the IRS, and the North Carolina State Police. I suggest you use that time wisely. Where are we supposed to go? Dana asked. That's not my problem anymore. As Harvey and Owen prepare to transport Dana and Mitch back to Mitch's house, and he pulled out his phone and made a call. Katie, it's Dad. Can you meet me at the house tomorrow morning? There are some things we need to discuss. Is everything okay? Mom's been acting really weird lately, and she wasn't home last night. Everything's going to be fine, sweetheart. Better than fine. I'll explain everything tomorrow. After hanging up, Andy stood alone in the warehouse, surrounded by the evidence of his successful operation. In less than 72 hours, he'd identified his enemies, gathered intelligence, executed a complex plan, and achieved total victory. Dana and Mitch would disappear, probably to South America or somewhere equally remote. They'd spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders, never knowing if tonight would be the night that Andy Williamson decided they'd learn enough. And Katie would finally learn the truth about what her mother had done and why her father had seemed to abandon her. Andy Williamson had served his country with honor for 20 years. Now he'd serve justice with the same dedication. The war was won. Chapter 7. The Truth. Katie Williamson sat at the kitchen table of her childhood home, staring at a stack of documents that had just destroyed everything she thought she knew about her life. Bank statements, surveillance photos, recorded conversations, legal papers, the complete evidence of her mother's betrayal laid out in chronological order. I don't understand, she said for the third time, her voice barely above a whisper. Mom said you didn't want to see me graduate. She said you were angry about something and that you might not come back from deployment. Andy sat across from his daughter, watching her process the magnitude of what she was learning. At 18, Katie had her mother's blonde hair and delicate features, but she had Andy's steel gray eyes and his stubborn jaw. Right now, those eyes were filling with tears as she realized how completely she'd been manipulated. Your mother lied to you, sweetheart, about everything. Katie picked up one of the surveillance photos, Dana and Mitch kissing outside an upscale hotel. How long has this been going on? Over a year, based on the evidence. Maybe longer. And you knew? When you came home, you already knew? I suspected something was wrong when your mother told me not to come to your graduation. I confirmed it within 12 hours. Katie was quiet for a long time, reading through bank statements that showed her mother systematically stealing money from joint accounts. She was planning to leave with him. Yes, and she was going to take me. Andy hesitated. This was the part he'd been dreading. Actually, sweetheart, she was planning to leave you behind. Katie looked up sharply. What? Andy played one of the recorded conversations from 2 nights ago. Dana's voice filled the kitchen. She's 18, Mitch. She's not a child anymore. She's not my problem. Katie listened to her mother casually discussing abandoning her, and something seemed to break inside her. The tears stopped, replaced by something harder. She was just going to leave me, she said flatly. I'm sorry, Katie. I know how much this hurts. Where is she now? Gone. She and Mitch left the country early this morning. Katie nodded, processing this information with a maturity that made Andy proud and sad at the same time. And you let them go. I gave them a choice. Face the legal consequences of what they'd done, or disappear forever. They chose to disappear. Will they ever come back? No. Katie was quiet for another long moment, then looked up at her father with an expression that reminded him powerfully of himself. Good. Andy was surprised by the venom in her voice. Katie, no, Dad. I'm done pretending this is some tragic misunderstanding. Mom didn't just cheat on you. She stole from us. She lied to me for over a year. She turned me against you and then planned to abandon me completely. Katie's voice was getting stronger, angrier. I don't want her to come back. I never want to see her again. Andy reached across the table and took his daughter's hand. It's okay to be angry, but don't let that anger poison you. Your mother made terrible choices, but she's still the woman who gave birth to you, who raised you, who lied to me every day for a year, Katie interrupted, who made me believe that you didn't love me anymore, who almost made me miss having my father at my graduation because she was protecting her affair. Katie pulled her hand away and stood up, pacing around the kitchen like a caged animal. You know what the worst part is? I actually felt sorry for her. When you were deployed, she'd cry and talk about how hard it was being alone, how much she missed you. And I'd comfort her. I'd tell her you'd be home soon, that everything would be okay. She was manipulating you. She was evil, Katie said with finality. And I'm glad she's gone. Andy studied his daughter's face, seeing emotions there that no 18-year-old should have to feel. But he also saw strength, resilience, the kind of character that would help her survive this betrayal and emerge stronger. What happens now? Katie asked. Now we rebuild. It's going to be just you and me for a while. What about college? Mom was supposed to help me with the applications, the financial aid forms. All taken care of. I've been managing our finances from deployment, and your college fund is intact. More than intact. Actually, since I recovered all the money your mother had stolen. Katie looked surprised. How much did she take? About $80,000 over the past year. Jesus. Katie sat back down heavily. She really was planning to destroy us completely, wasn't she? Yes, she was. They sat in silence for a while, both processing the magnitude of what had happened. Finally, Katie spoke. Dad, can I ask you something? Anything. The way Mom and Mitch disappeared. Did you hurt them? Andy considered his answer carefully. I made sure they understood the consequences of their actions. I made sure they knew that there would be no forgiveness, no second chances, no opportunity to hurt us again. But no, I didn't physically harm them. But you could have. Yes. Katie nodded, as if this confirmed something she'd been thinking. Good. I'm glad you're scary when you need to be. This wasn't the reaction Andy had expected. Katie, no, Dad, listen. I've been thinking about this since you showed me the evidence. Mom and Mitch were predators. They planned this whole thing, manipulated everyone around them, and we're going to destroy our family for money. Normal people don't do that. And normal responses don't work against people like that. Katie leaned forward, her gray eyes intense. You fought back. You used your skills, your resources, your intelligence to protect us. You made sure they couldn't hurt anyone else the way they hurt us. That's not scary. That's justice. Andy felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. His daughter was showing remarkable strength, but he didn't want her to become as hard as he'd had to become. Justice is important, he said carefully. But so is knowing when to stop, when to show mercy. Did they show us mercy? Did they show mercy to Mitch's other victims? No, they didn't. Then they got exactly what they deserved. Katie stood up and began collecting the evidence files. I want copies of all this. Why? Because someday, when I'm older, when I have children of my own, I want to remember exactly what betrayal looks like. I want to remember what people are capable of when they think they can get away with it. She paused at the doorway, and I want to remember what it looks like when someone fights back. After Katie went upstairs to her room, Andy sat alone in the kitchen, thinking about what his daughter had said. She was right about most of it. Dana and Mitch had been predators who deserved everything they'd gotten. But her response worried him. There was a hardness in her voice, a coldness in her eyes that reminded him too much of himself. His phone buzzed with a text from Frankie. Package delivered. Subject are on a plane to Costa Rica. They won't be back. Andy deleted the message and went to his study, where he opened a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving for his retirement. As he poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon, he thought about the choices that had brought him to this point. He'd served his country with honor for 20 years. He'd been a good husband, a devoted father, a man who'd kept his promises even when keeping them cost him dearly. And his reward had been betrayal by the person he'd trusted most. But he'd won. Not just survived, not just escaped, won completely. His enemies were destroyed, his daughter was safe, and his future was secure. So why did victory taste so much like ashes? Because, Andy realized, some victories came at a cost that couldn't be measured in money or justice or revenge. Some victories changed you in ways that could never be undone. He'd protected his daughter from her mother's betrayal, but in doing so, he'd shown her a side of the world and a side of himself that no child should have to see. Andy finished his drink and went upstairs to check on Katie. She was at her desk, reading through the evidence files again, making notes in a notebook. What are you writing? He asked. A timeline. I want to understand exactly when everything happened, when the lies started, why I should have known something was wrong. Katie, you were 17 when this started. You had no way of knowing. I should have seen it, she said firmly. I should have questioned why Mom was suddenly so negative about you, why she kept making excuses for why you couldn't call more often, why she seemed so eager for me to make plans that didn't include you. Katie looked up at her father, and her expression was eerily mature. I won't be fooled like that again. By anyone. Andy kissed the top of her head. Get some sleep, sweetheart. Tomorrow we start over. Dad, yes. I'm proud of you. For fighting back. For not letting them win. As Andy went to his own room, he carried Katie's words with him. His daughter was proud of him for being ruthless, for being unforgiving, for destroying people who'd betrayed him. She was becoming just like him, and Andy wasn't sure if that was something to celebrate or something to mourn. Chapter 8. Ghosts. 3 months after Dana and Mitch disappeared, Andy received a phone call that changed everything. He was in his study, reviewing college applications with Katie, when his secure phone, the one only his military contacts knew about, rang with a number he didn't recognize. Andy Williamson. Mr. Williamson, this is Special Agent Maribel Chapman, FBI. I need to speak with you about Dana Williamson and Mitch Head. Andy felt his blood turn to ice. I'm sorry, who? Sir, we know they've left the country. We know you were involved in their departure. And we know there's more to this story than what's in the police reports. I have no idea what you're talking about. Mr. Williamson, I'm calling you as a courtesy because of your military service. But make no mistake, this is an official investigation. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? After hanging up, Andy sat staring at the phone. He'd covered his tracks carefully, used professionals who knew how to operate without leaving evidence. But the FBI had resources that went beyond normal law enforcement. Dad, Katie looked up from her college application. Is everything okay? Just work stuff, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about. But Andy was worried. Very worried. The next morning, he met Special Agent Chapman at a coffee shop in downtown Fayetteville. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes and the kind of bearing that suggested military background. Army, Andy asked as she sat down. Marines. 8 years before law school. Chapman studied Andy's face. Iraq, Afghanistan, and Iraq, and a few places that don't officially exist. They sized each other up like the veterans they were, each recognizing something familiar in the other. Mr. Williamson, I'm going to be direct. 3 months ago, your wife and her lover disappeared without a trace. Before they left, someone systematically destroyed their financial, legal, and professional standing. Someone with access to military-grade surveillance equipment and personnel. Sounds like they made some powerful enemies. Yes, they did. The question is whether those enemies broke any federal laws. And he leaned back in his chair. Agent Chapman, my wife committed adultery and fraud. She stole money from our joint accounts and planned to abandon our daughter. If someone exposed her crimes and gave her a chance to face the consequences or leave voluntarily, that sounds like justice to me. It also sounds like vigilante action. And vigilante action, even against guilty parties, is still illegal. Do you have any evidence that I committed a crime? Chapman opened a folder and spread out several documents. We have evidence that someone conducted illegal surveillance, broke into private property, and possibly kidnapped 2 American citizens. Kidnapped? That's a serious accusation. Mitch Head's neighbors reported seeing unmarked vehicles near his house the night he disappeared. His security system shows evidence of electronic tampering, and his housekeeper found signs that people had been held against their will in his garage. Andy studied the documents without touching them. Sounds like Mr. Head had more enemies than just cuckolded husbands. Mr. Williamson, I know you have connections to people who specialize in off-the-books operations. I know you called in favors to make this happen. Even if that were true, which I'm not admitting, you'd have to prove it. And you'd have to convince a jury that the real criminals were the people who exposed fraud and adultery, not the people who committed it. Chapman closed the folder. You're right. The evidence is circumstantial, and frankly, Dana and Mitch aren't sympathetic victims. But there's something else. She pulled out another file, this one much thicker. Mitch Head was already under federal investigation for interstate fraud. We've been building a case against him for months. His disappearance destroyed 3 years of investigative work, and he felt the first real chill of fear. I'm sorry to hear that. He was on a flip, Mr. Williamson. We had enough evidence to put him away for 20 years, and he was going to give us his entire network. Names, locations, methods, bank accounts. We were about to break up one of the largest fraud rings targeting military families in the country. The coffee shop suddenly felt very quiet. Instead, Chapman continued, our primary target is hiding somewhere in Central America. Our investigation is ruined, and dozens of other victims will never get justice. And he met her eyes steadily. That's unfortunate, but it's not my problem. Isn't it? You're a career military man. You took an oath to protect and serve. Do you really feel good about letting dozens of other military families suffer because you wanted personal revenge? The words hit Andy like physical blows. He'd been so focused on protecting his own family, on getting justice for his own betrayal, that he'd never considered the bigger picture. How many other victims? He asked quietly. 43 that we know of. Maybe more. Mitch Head was part of a sophisticated operation that specifically targeted military wives during deployments. Your wife wasn't his first victim, and she wouldn't have been his last. Chapman leaned forward. Mr. Williamson, I understand why you did what you did. If someone had hurt my family the way they hurt yours, I might have done the same thing. But your actions have consequences beyond your personal situation. Andy was quiet for a long time, processing what he'd learned. What do you want from me? Information. Locations. Anything that might help us find Head and continue the investigation. I told you, I don't know where he is. But you know people who do. You know people who could find him. Andy considered this. Frankie's organization had resources that could track anyone, anywhere. But using those resources again would mean admitting to Chapman that he'd been involved in the original operation. Hypothetically, Andy said, if someone were to provide information about Head's location, what would happen to that someone? Hypothetically, if that someone were a decorated veteran who'd been the victim of fraud and adultery, and if that someone were to cooperate fully with our investigation, the Justice Department might be inclined to overlook certain irregularities in how the information was obtained. It was a deal. Immunity in exchange for cooperation. I need 24 hours, Andy said. You have 12. That afternoon, Andy called an emergency meeting with his team at the warehouse. When he explained the situation, the reactions were predictably mixed. This is why we don't leave loose ends, Owens said flatly. Should have solved the problem permanently from the beginning. The FBI agent is right, Frankie said. We focus on the personal betrayal and ignored the bigger picture. Head was part of something larger. So what's the play? Harvey asked, and he had been thinking about that question all afternoon. We give him Head, not Dana. She's Katie's mother, and despite everything, I won't be responsible for putting her in federal prison. But Head is a predator who's hurt dozens of families. He needs to face justice. And if Head tries to implicate us? Devin asked. He won't, because we're going to make sure he understands that cooperating with the FBI is his only chance of staying alive. It took Frankie's people 6 hours to locate Mitch Head. He was living in a beachfront condo in Costa Rica, apparently convinced that he'd successfully escaped justice. He had no idea that Andy Williamson's reach extended far beyond the borders of North Carolina. The extraction was simple and clean. Head was sedated, transported to a private airfield, and flown back to the United States in a corporate jet that existed only on paper. By the time he woke up, he was in federal custody in Quantico, Virginia. The FBI was impressed by the professionalism of the operation, though they asked no questions about methodology. Special Agent Chapman called Andy that evening. Mr. Head is being very cooperative. It seems someone convinced him that his best option was to tell us everything he knows. I'm glad to hear he's seeing reason. He's provided information about a network spanning 12 states and involving millions of dollars in fraud against military families. It's going to be the biggest bust of its kind in FBI history. In my situation, as far as the Bureau is concerned, you were the victim of a crime who provided valuable information to help us solve it. There are no charges pending, and none will be filed. After hanging up, Andy sat in his study, thinking about the conversation with Chapman and what it meant. He'd won his personal war against Dana and Mitch, but in doing so, he'd almost let a much larger evil escape justice. It was a reminder that even righteous anger could have unintended consequences, that personal revenge sometimes came at the cost of broader justice. Katie appeared in the doorway. Dad, you look worried. Just thinking about choices, sweetheart. And consequences. The FBI agent called, didn't she? Andy looked up sharply. How did you? I saw the name on your phone when it rang. I looked her up online. Katie sat down across from her father. She's investigating fraud against military families. Mom and Mitch were part of something bigger, weren't they? There was no point in lying. Katie was too smart, and she'd already seen enough deception to last a lifetime. Yes, they were. And when I made them disappear, I accidentally interfered with an FBI investigation. But you fixed it. You helped them catch the real bad guys. Yes, I did, but I almost didn't. I was so focused on our situation that I almost let dozens of other families suffer. Katie was quiet for a moment, then nodded. That's why justice has to be bigger than revenge. Andy looked at his daughter with surprise. That's a very wise observation. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about what you did, what Mom did, what it all means. Katie met her father's eyes. I understand why you did what you did, and I'm still glad you fought back. But I also understand that being strong enough to fight means being wise enough to know when fighting isn't enough. As Andy tucked Katie into bed that night, he reflected on how much his daughter had grown in just 3 months. She'd seen betrayal, revenge, and justice up close, and somehow she'd emerged with a wisdom that most adults never achieved. Maybe that was the real victory, not the destruction of his enemies, but the preservation of his daughter's moral compass despite everything she'd been through. The ghost of his choices would always be with him. But Katie would face her future with strength, wisdom, and the knowledge that sometimes fighting back was the only option. That was enough. Chapter 9. No Forgiveness. 1 year later, Andy Williamson stood at the graduation ceremony of the FBI National Academy, watching Special Agent Maribel Chapman receive an award for her work on the largest military family fraud case in Bureau history. The investigation had resulted in 47 arrests, the recovery of over $12 million in stolen assets, and the creation of new protocols for protecting military families from financial predators. Katie sat beside him, resplendent in her cap and gown. She graduated as valedictorian of her high school class and would be starting at West Point in the fall. The girl who'd been manipulated and nearly abandoned by her mother had transformed into a young woman of remarkable strength and purpose. "Proud of you, kiddo," Andy whispered as they watched Chapman's acceptance speech. "Proud of you too, Dad, for doing the right thing in the end." The right thing? Andy still wasn't sure he could claim that distinction. He destroyed his enemies utterly, shown no mercy, and nearly let a larger injustice continue unchecked. But he'd also protected his daughter, recovered their stolen money, and ultimately helped bring down a network of predators. After the ceremony, Chapman approached them in the parking lot. "Mr. Williamson, Katie, I wanted to thank you both again for your cooperation. Any word on the remaining suspects?" Andy asked. "We've arrested 34 of the 47 targets. The rest are in countries that don't extradite, but they'll never be able to return to the United States." "Including Dana?" Chapman's expression grew carefully neutral. Mrs. Williamson was never charged with federal crimes. Her involvement was limited to her relationship with Head, and since she left the country voluntarily, the Justice Department doesn't consider her a priority target. It was a polite way of saying that Dana would never face legal consequences for her betrayal. She would spend the rest of her life in exile, cut off from her daughter and everything she'd known, but she would never see the inside of a prison cell. Katie spoke for the first time since the ceremony. "What about the other women who were involved with these men? The ones who helped them target military families?" "That's more complicated. Some were clearly victims who were manipulated. Others were willing participants. We're evaluating each case individually." After Chapman left, Andy and Katie drove home in comfortable silence. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the shadows of betrayal had finally been banished. As they pulled into the driveway, Katie spoke. "Dad, do you ever regret what you did?" Andy considered the question carefully. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that your mother made the choices she made. But no, I don't regret fighting back. Even knowing what we know now, about the FBI investigation, about all the other victims, especially knowing that your mother and Mitch were predators, Katie. They would have continued destroying families if someone hadn't stopped them." Katie nodded. "Do you think Mom knows? About the arrest, about what happened to Mitch?" "I'm sure she does. It's been all over the news." "Do you think she regrets it? What she did to us?" Andy parked the car and turned to look at his daughter. "I think your mother regrets getting caught. I think she regrets losing everything she thought she was going to gain. But do I think she regrets betraying us? No, Katie, I don't think she does." "How can you be so sure?" "Because true remorse requires empathy. It requires understanding how your actions hurt other people. Your mother never showed any concern for how her betrayal affected you or me. She was only upset when she realized there would be consequences." Katie was quiet for a moment, then asked the question Andy had been dreading. "Do you think I'll ever see her again? Do you want to?" "No," Katie said without hesitation. "I just wondered if you'd try to stop me if I changed my mind." Andy shook his head. "You're 18 now, almost 19. You're an adult who can make her own decisions. But Katie, if you ever do decide to contact your mother, remember who she really is. Remember what she was willing to do to us. Don't let her manipulate you again." "I won't," Katie said with the quiet confidence that had become her trademark. "I know exactly who she is now, and I know who I am too." That evening, as Andy sat in his study, he received an encrypted email from an address he didn't recognize. When he opened it, he found a single photograph. Dana, sitting alone at a sidewalk cafe in what looked like a Central American city. She appeared older, worn down by exile and the constant fear of discovery. Her hair was different, her clothes were modest, and her eyes held the hollow look of someone who'd lost everything that mattered. There was no message, no explanation of who had sent the photo or why. But Andy understood. It was a reminder that his reach was still long, that even in exile, Dana was not beyond his influence. He deleted the email and the photograph without saving either. Dana Williamson was dead to him, as surely as if she'd been buried in the ground. The woman in the photo was just a stranger who happened to share her face. Andy's phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Frankie. Andy, just wanted to let you know, word came back from our contacts in Costa Rica. Had tried to escape federal custody during transport. Didn't make it. Andy was quiet for a moment. Tried to escape, or help to escape. Does it matter? Justice was served either way. After hanging up, Andy sat in the darkness of his study, thinking about justice and revenge and the thin line between them. Mitch Head was dead, killed while attempting to escape federal custody. The official report would show that he'd been shot by U.S. Marshals while trying to flee during a prisoner transport. The truth was probably more complicated, but Andy felt no guilt about Head's death. The man had been a predator who destroyed dozens of families and shown no remorse for his crimes. Whether he died during a legitimate escape attempt or been eliminated to prevent him from revealing inconvenient truths about his capture, the world was a better place without him. Some people deserve forgiveness. Some people deserve second chances. Mitch Head and Dana Williamson were not those people. A soft knock on the study door interrupted Andy's thoughts. Katie stood in the doorway, wearing pajamas and holding a cup of tea. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Just thinking." "Come in, sweetheart." Katie curled up in the leather chair across from his desk, tucking her feet under her like she used to do as a little girl. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you think I'm too hard? Too unforgiving?" The question surprised Andy. "What makes you ask that?" "Some of my friends think I should try to contact Mom. They say family is family, that forgiveness is important, that holding grudges will hurt me more than it hurts her." "What do you think?" "I think they don't understand what really happened. They think this was just a normal divorce where parents made mistakes. They don't understand that Mom was willing to destroy our family for money and abandon me completely." Katie sipped her tea, organizing her thoughts. "I've been reading about forgiveness, about whether it's always necessary or always good. And I've decided that forgiveness has to be earned. It's not something you give away for free just because someone shares your DNA. That's a very mature perspective. I learned it from you. You showed me that some betrayals are unforgivable, that some people will take advantage of mercy and see it as weakness." Katie met her father's eyes. "I'm not angry anymore, Dad. I don't hate Mom, but I don't forgive her either, and I never will. She made her choices, and now she has to live with the consequences." Andy felt a complicated mix of pride and sadness. His daughter had learned to be strong, to protect herself, to recognize betrayal and respond appropriately. But she'd also learned to be unforgiving, to write people off permanently, to see mercy as a luxury she couldn't afford. She'd become like him. "Katie, I want you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me that you'll never let what happened with your mother make you afraid to trust people who deserve it. Promise me you won't let her betrayal turn you into someone who can't love fully, because you're always watching for signs of deception." Katie considered this seriously. "I promise I'll try. But Dad, I also promise that I'll never be a victim again. I'll never be manipulated or betrayed the way Mom tried to manipulate and betray us." "That's fair." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, father and daughter, survivors of the same war. Outside, the North Carolina night was quiet and peaceful, giving no hint of the battles that had been fought and won within these walls. Finally, Katie stood up. "I should get some sleep. Early morning tomorrow." "Katie." "Yes. I'm proud of who you've become. Your mother's betrayal could have broken you, could have made you weak or bitter or afraid. Instead, it made you stronger. That's a rare gift." Katie smiled, and for a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to wait by the window for her father to come home from deployment. "I had a good teacher," she said. After Katie went to bed, Andy remained in his study for another hour, thinking about forgiveness and justice and the prices both demanded. He'd chosen justice over mercy, strength over forgiveness, and he taught his daughter to make the same choice. It had saved them both, but it had also changed them in ways that could never be undone. Andy Williamson had spent 20 years serving his country, and he'd spent the last year serving justice. He'd protected his daughter, destroyed his enemies, and helped bring down a network of predators who'd victimized dozens of military families. He'd won every battle, but victory, Andy had learned, was a cold companion. It kept you safe, it preserved your strength, it ensured that no one could hurt you the way you'd been hurt before. It also ensured that you'd never be quite the same person you'd been before the war began. Andy turned off the lights in his study and headed upstairs. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, new opportunities to choose between mercy and justice. And Andy Williamson would be ready for all of them, because some men forgave, and some men won. Andy had chosen to win. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.